Mr. President, last week the Washington Examiner published an article highlighting Democrats' third filibuster of this new Congress. That's right, you heard it, third. The party that mere months ago, literally, was gleefully making plans to destroy the filibuster is now using the filibuster left and right. But as we know, for Democrats, it's one rule for me, another for thee. And as the Washington Examiner piece made clear, some Democrats are even embracing their hypocrisy. You use the rules that exist, one Democrat said. I might advocate for a higher speed limit, but I still observe the speed limit until it's changed. Well, okay, Mr. President, but are Democrats still crusading to abolish the filibuster while Republicans are in charge? The answer is, of course not. Because abolishing the filibuster isn't about principle for Democrats, it's about political advantage. So Democrats will unashamedly support different rules depending on who's in charge. Now, Mr. President, I could spend my whole time today talking about Democrats' rank hypocrisy when it comes to the filibuster. But I also like to talk about the content of the bills that they filibustered and what that says about the Democrat Party. Mr. President, in a few short weeks of this new Congress, Democrats have filibustered 3 bills. The Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act, the Illegitimate Court Counteraction Act, otherwise known as the ICC Sanctions Bill, and the Protection of Women and Girls in Sports Act. The Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act was a simple bill. It simply stated that a baby born alive after an attempted abortion must be given the same protection and medical care that any other newborn baby would be given. That's it. You would assume such a bill would be entirely uncontroversial. Democrats may not believe in protecting unborn human beings, but surely they still believe in protecting born human beings. But as it turns out, protecting born human beings, at least when they're born alive after an abortion, is not on the Democrats' priority list. In fact, every Democrat in the Senate, every Democrat, without exception, voted against this bill. And I'm afraid the sad truth, Mr. President, is that Democrats are so deeply concerned with preserving the supposed right to kill unborn babies, they couldn't bring themselves to protect born babies, for fear that it would eventually lead to recognizing the humanity of the unborn. And all I can say, Mr. President, is that a party that is so committed to killing unborn babies that it can't vote to protect born babies is nothing short of morally bankrupt. So that was the first bill that Democrats filibustered. The next was the ICC Sanctions Bill, and that was another straightforward bill, Mr. President. It would have sanctioned foreign individuals who are involved in international criminal court efforts to investigate, arrest, or prosecute U.S. citizens or citizens of U.S. allies that are not party to the ICC, or the International Criminal Court. The bill was a response to the ICC's decision to pursue warrants for Israeli officials. And it was also designed to protect Americans, and American soldiers in particular, who've been targeted by the ICC in the past. But once again, Senate Democrats, with one lone exception, found themselves incapable of taking a stand. Now, I'm not sure if it was anti-Israel animus, or if they were afraid of antagonizing the anti-Israel wing of their party, or if they're simply too beholden to big tech, which lodged some tenuous concerns about this legislation. But for whatever reason, Democrats filibustered the bill. And in doing so, they not only failed to rebuke the ICC for its illegitimate targeting of Israeli leaders, but they failed to protect U.S. citizens. Mr. President, the third bill the Democrats filibustered, and filibustered just this past week, I might add, was the Protection of Women and Girls in Sports Act. This legislation was designed to restore the original intent of Title IX, which is giving women equal opportunities in education, by ensuring that women and girls and women and girls only are permitted to play in women's sports at federally funded educational institutions. The bill, of course, is a response to the growing problem of women's sports being invaded by biological males. And I want to quote for you something from an August 2024, this is United Nations report. Just last August, report from the United Nations on violence against women and girls, and it noted, and I quote, "The replacement of the female sports category with a mixed-sex category has resulted in an increasing number of female athletes losing opportunities, including medals, when competing against males. According to information received by March 30th of 2024, over 600 female athletes in more than 400 competitions have lost more than 890 medals in 29 different sports," end quote. Over 600 female athletes in more than 400 competitions have lost more than 890 medals in 29 different sports. That a quote, Mr. President, out of the United Nations report on violence against women and girls coming in August of last year. Mr. President, it's not even remotely fair. Girls should not be having to compete in races that are stacked against them. Women deserve their own athletic opportunities, opportunities that are not taken away from them by biological males who have their own spaces in which to compete. But try explaining that to Democrats. Democrats like to portray themselves as leading the charge on women's issues. But not one Democrat, not one, could bring himself or herself to vote in support of women and girls. Biological males, not women, got Democrat support last Monday. Well, apparently, Democrats' commitment to equal opportunity for women only runs so deep and quickly falls by the wayside when the left demands adherence to some new ideology. Mr. President, the outcome of the 2024 presidential election was partially rebuke of far-left dogmas and ideologies. But apparently, Democrats have learned nothing from that electoral rebuke. Today, Mr. President, the supposed party of the little guy, the underdog, the disadvantaged, has become a party willing to sacrifice born human beings to abortion extremism and equality for women and girls on the altar of transgender ideology. I have to say, Mr. President, it is no wonder that the American people rejected them in November of 2024. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of quorum.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, very soon the Senate's going to be voting on a budget resolution that essentially accomplishes 5 objectives, but at least 4. And one is to prevent a $4 trillion tax increase on the American people at the end of the year, number 1. Number 2, it rebuilds our military by investing in our military readiness in a way that will enable us to deal with and deter the threats that America deals with in a very dangerous world. It'll restore energy dominance for our country, making energy more affordable to the American people, something that we saw a huge run-up during the Biden inflation days. Part of that, in a big way, was the cost of energy. Obviously, securing the border. And there are resources in there to make sure that over the course of the next 4 years of this administration that they have what they need to ensure that our border is secure and that the American people are safe. And finally, Mr. President, reducing spending. Now, I know that's a sort of a novel concept around here. We've heard a lot about, massive tax cuts for billionaires. That's been a recurring theme that we've heard from the Democrats. But the one thing you don't hear a lot about is the run-up in federal spending. So tax revenues, as a general rule, have stayed very static as a percentage of our entire economy, around 17.1% thereabouts. Government spending as a percentage of our economy, on the other hand, has gone up, and gone up dramatically. So just take a look at this chart. Basically, in the last 5 years, the run-up that we've seen in spending has been about 56% from 2019 to 2024. 56% increase in spending. Now, what's ironic about that, Mr. President, is government revenue's also been going up, right? Everybody said, well, you're going to cut taxes, we're going to run these big deficits. Well, what happened? In 2017, we cut taxes on the American people, we unleashed the American economy, we reduced rates, accelerated cost recovery, so people could recover their capital investments more quickly. What did? They invested. And it created more, not less revenue. $1.5 trillion more than was projected at the time by the Joint Committee on Taxation and the CBO. $1.5 trillion more revenue than what was projected. I think you can say they missed it by a long shot. Well, this time around, we've seen estimates, and Senator Graham, Senator Crapo were down here earlier today, suggesting that the Council of Economic Advisors' prediction is that you will see revenue increase by about $4 trillion by making the 2017 tax law permanent. So what we have, Mr. President, the reason we're running these big deficits isn't because we tax too little, it's because we spend too much. That's the delta. Tax revenues have gone up, and gone up consistently over time, particularly since 2017. What's gone up a lot faster, as I said, is government spending. And so we have this deficit, and the way we're going to have to deal with that is to get more growth in the economy, generate more revenue, because when the economy is growing and expanding, it's creating jobs, people are working, they're taking realizations, and they're paying more taxes. And that's what happens when you reduce taxes. And that's why it's so important that we extend and make permanent the 2017 tax law. This is what we're talking about here today. This is what this conversation, frankly, is all about. Now, Mr. President, one of the things that has been interesting in this debate, because I heard lots of conversation from my colleagues on the other side about massive new tax cuts for billionaires. But let me tell you what, if you vote against this budget resolution, you will be voting for. You will be voting for a $4 trillion tax increase on our economy and on the American people. Of that $4 trillion tax increase, $2.6 trillion will fall on people who make less than $400,000 a year. Something that Joe Biden and I think pretty much every Senate Democrat pledged not to do. Well, how does that happen, you ask? Well, here's what happens. In 2017, when we passed the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, one of the things, the features of that bill, was a doubling of the child tax credit from $1,000 to $2,000. It also had a near doubling of the standard deduction, and it had a lowering of rates. It had multiple ways in which working families in this country would benefit. If we don't extend the tax relief before the end of the year, $2.6 trillion of that tax increase falls on people making less than $400,000 a year. Now, I've heard the Democrats' own presidential candidate said last year, and I quote, "We cannot, and I will not, raise taxes on anyone making less than $400,000 a year." That was Vice President Harris, who was running for president. President Biden made the same promise, as did the current Democrat leader. And when the Democrats were considering their so-called Inflation Reduction Act, which perhaps more aptly could have been titled Do Nothing About Inflation Act, the Democrat leader repeatedly emphasized the Democrats would not be raising taxes on anyone making less than $400,000 a year. Well, that's it. That's what you're doing. Because this tax increase is going to hit American families. $2.6 trillion of it is going to hit families making less than $400,000 a year. So you cut the child tax credit. Let's say you have 4 kids in this country. Now, the tax credit, the child tax credit, is a direct credit against tax liability, meaning it's a dollar-for-dollar reduction in tax liability if you have a tax liability that exceeds the amount of the credit. So let's say you have 4 kids. Today it's $2,000. Well, if we don't move to extend this tax relief by the end of the year, that $1,000 is going to be from $8,000 down to $4,000, $2,000 per child down to $1,000 per child, and that family's taxes are going to go up by about $4,000. Now, if they don't have that big of a tax liability, there's a refundability component, and we can have a conversation about the merits of that, but that means they're going to be getting a payment or not, and probably not, because cutting that child tax credit back to $1,000 is going to fall largely on people who have families in this country. Same thing with the standard deduction. It will be cut nearly in half. And the interesting thing about that, Mr. President, is when we made that change back in 2017, fewer people started itemizing, more people started taking the standard deduction because the standard deduction was about $30,000 a year. Well, what happens if we don't extend this tax relief, that $30,000 goes back down to about $15,000 a year. Again, hitting working families, coupled again with what I said is higher rates. The rates will go back up. So forget about the idea that you're not going to raise taxes on people making less than $400,000 a year, because you clearly are. That's just a fact. It's just simply a fact. So what about small businesses? Well, small businesses would pay, if we don't extend the current tax policy, $600 billion more if these tax cuts expire. Because pass-through businesses, and that's your LLCs, your subchapter S corporations, your sole proprietorships, pay at the individual rate. The rates would go back up, and we put a feature in that bill called 199A. It was a 20% deduction for pass-through businesses. That also goes away. So small businesses are going to pay $600,000 more per year, or I should say, or $600 billion more throughout the course of this tax policy if we don't do something to extend it. So you lose 199A, you lose the lower rates that come with it if you're a small business, and you'll see a lot less investment in our economy. Now, as I mentioned in 2017, two of the objectives on that, particularly on the business side, were to lower rates and to allow for faster cost recovery and to grow the economy. And it did. It worked. The economy over the past 7 years grew, if you can believe this, 5.4% more than what CBO had projected in 2017 prior to the passage of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Well, what did that mean? It meant a 50-year low for unemployment, record low poverty, high median household income, a narrowing of the income disparity gap in this country. So, Mr. President, what about deficits? As I said before, by any objective metric, revenues dramatically exceeded what was predicted in 2017 about what the effect of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act would be. Now, revenues, as I mentioned, you look at this chart again, on average about 17% as a percentage of our economy. Unfortunately, spending as a percentage of our economy, which as recently as a decade ago was about 20%, is now over 23%, and growing to 24 to 25%. And part of that is all the new spending that was associated with things like, for example, the IRA. So the inflation, so-called Inflation Reduction Act, there were some provisions in there, some energy provisions, for example, that at the time were scored to cost about a little over $200 billion. Today, they're actually over $1 trillion, so CBO missed that one by about 400%. And as I said earlier, the Council of Economic Advisors projects a $4.1 trillion increase in revenue from extending the 2017 law. So could it be that the run-up in deficits happened because of the last two Democrat reconciliation bills? Or perhaps some other things that they have done along the way, like the $250 billion in SNAP increase, almost, as I said, without any approval from Congress, something that my colleagues on the other side have talked about, how this executive branch has, ignored the will of Congress. Well, that was a $250 billion increase without approval from Congress. Then you had the student loan forgiveness program, and as you recall, student loans, that program was used as a pay-for back in a reconciliation bill the Democrats did back in 2010. And when they did that, many of us predicted that they would go ahead and use it to forgive student loans. So student loan now forgiveness, which is subject to court action, resulted in several $100 billion of additional spending not approved by the Congress, but that particular move got no pushback from anybody on this side of the aisle, not a peep. Hundreds of billions of dollars of spending by use of executive power. And what I've concluded from all this is that my colleagues on the other side talk a lot about misuse or abuse, if you will, of executive power, but that's not the issue. It's how the executive power is used. And if it's used in a way that you agree with, which it was in both of those examples I just mentioned, then you're fine with use of executive power. Like I said, didn't hear a peep from people over here when that was done. Now, my colleagues, both Senator Graham and Senator Crapo, talked about the use of a current policy baseline. So in 2012, the Obama White House came up with something called the alternative fiscal scenario when it came time to extend the Bush tax cuts. And that was about a $4 trillion use of the alternative fiscal scenario. Translation, current policy baseline. There are 18 Democrats still here in the Senate today who voted for that, for use of that baseline. And Mr. President, I would simply say that when it comes to extending tax relief, there's always a reluctance by my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. When it comes to new spending, they embrace that idea. We have a different view. We have different views of government. And the use of reconciliation, which is what this is about, the budget resolution opens the door to reconciliation, is in many respects a great example of the contrast in how we view this. The Democrats view reconciliation as a way to grow government, increase spending, new programs. The ARPA bill was about $2 trillion in spending. The IRA was about $1 trillion in spending. Both were used by the Democrats through a budget resolution and reconciliation to increase spending. Republicans, a lot of times, and we did in 2017, used it to reduce taxes and to reform the tax code, which was desperately needed. But as a consequence of that, as I said, we got not less revenue but more, $1.5 trillion more than was predicted at the time. And on the other side of the equation, when it comes to spending, the estimators, the so-called referees, tend to underestimate how much things are going to cost. Example, the so-called Inflation Reduction Act. But the bottom line in all this, Madam President, is that we need to address a lot of concerns in this country, many of which are dealt with in this budget resolution and ultimately the budget reconciliation bill. But one of the most important ones is this number right here. The deficits that continue to grow over time as a result not of too little revenue, which continues to increase over time, but of dramatically increased spending. That's the issue. And my colleagues here on this side of the aisle believe that you get at that by bending the curve down on the spending side, and on the tax, regulatory, energy side, pro-growth policies, particularly making permanent the tax policy that was passed in 2017, that will unleash investment in America and which will lead ultimately not only to better paying jobs, lower unemployment, hopefully a narrowing of the income disparity that we have in this country, but also, interestingly enough, higher government revenues. That's what this is all about, whether you want to vote for extending the tax policy and avoiding a $4 trillion tax increase, or whether you want to vote in favor of this resolution and make sure that the 2017 tax policy that was passed is extended permanently and that it unleashes the American economy in a way that will continue not only to create those better paying jobs, but also make this deficit picture look a lot smaller by comparison, coupled with significant reductions in spending. That's what we got to do. That's what this is about. And I hope that our colleagues, all of our colleagues on this side of the aisle, will vote yes tonight. We're going to have a number of amendment votes, which always happens during a budget resolution, vote-a-rama, and we look forward to getting that process underway. So let's let the voting begin. Thank you, Madam President. And Madam President, I would now ask unanimous consent that the following amendments be in order. That the amendments be reported by number with no amendments in order prior to a vote in relation to the amendments. Number 1, Sullivan, number 2035. Number 2, Merkley, number 1758. Number 3, Reed, number 1645. Number 4, Lujan, number 1726. Number 5, Warner, number 1310. Number 6, also Brooks, number 1466. Number 7, Kelly by voice, number 1737. Number 8, Murphy by voice, number 1977.
Hold 1 second. Eliminate the by voice part. Just reword it and don't say the voice part.
Number 7, number 1737 Kelly. Number 8, number 1977 Murphy. Number 9, number 1773 King. Number 10, number 1647 Warren. Number 11, number 1884 Schumer. Number 12, number 1774 Padilla. Number 13, number 1646 Bennett. And number 14, number 1760 Paul.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Madam President. I yield back time on the budget resolution.
On this vote, the ayes are 52, the nays are 47. The amendment is agreed to. Democrat leader.
Mr. President, may we have order?
Senate will be in order.
Mr. President, this is a dark day for America, a dark day for rural Americans, a dark day for any American who relies on public broadcasting during floods, hurricanes, tornadoes, and other disasters. And this is also a dark day for this chamber. Everyone here knows this is not how the Senate should function. I urge my colleagues to vote no.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I want to thank Senator Schmidt for doing an exceptional job of managing this legislation on the floor. And also simply point out that, you know, our country is $36 trillion in debt. We can't keep doing the things the way $36 trillion in debt.
Senate will be in order.
In debt. We can't keep doing the things the way we've been doing them. Ladies and gentlemen, what we're talking
Senate will be in order.
What we're talking about here is 1/10 of 1% of all federal spending. 1/10 of 1% of all federal spending. But it's a step in the right direction, and it's the first time we've done anything like this in 35 years. So I hope our colleagues will vote yes and support this legislation that is going to start moving us in a different direction that gets us on a path to a more fiscally sustainable path for the future of our country. Thank you. The process is well underway here in the Senate. The Senate Appropriations Committee under Chair Collins has released 4 bipartisan appropriations bills. And this week, we're doing something a bit unusual. We're bringing appropriations legislation to the floor. Now, why do I say that's unusual, Mr. President? Well, because last year, despite the fact that the Senate Appropriations Committee approved 11 out of the 12 yearly appropriations bills with bipartisan support, the Democrat leader never brought a single one of those bills to the floor. Not one. And one of the things that I've been determined to do as leader is to restore us as much as possible to a regular order appropriations process, to have bills move through the committees and then come to the Senate floor for debate and amendment. And that's what we're doing this week with consideration of the Military Construction and Veterans Affairs Appropriations Bill for fiscal year 2026. This legislation was approved by the Senate Appropriations Committee in a robustly bipartisan vote of 26-3. And I hope it will receive equally robust bipartisan support on the Senate floor. The MILCON VA Appropriations Bill provides critical funding for veterans' health care, veterans' benefits, and construction projects at military bases and installations around the globe. As a resident of a rural state, I'm particularly pleased by the bill's funding for telehealth services as well as for the Office of Rural Health at the Department of Veterans Affairs. This funding will help reduce barriers to care for rural veterans, as will the bill's provision preventing the VA from closing hospitals, something that I work to include. I'm also pleased to see that the bill continues to fund modernization of veterans' health care records by providing funding to triple the number of VA sites that use electronic health records. And on the military construction front, I'm happy to announce that the bill contains funding for a number of key facilities for the new B-21 bomber, the future of our long-range bomber fleet, which will have its first home at Ellsworth Air Force Base in South Dakota. National Guard facilities in South Dakota, like National Guard facilities around the country, will also see funding for essential construction projects thanks to this legislation. Mr. President, considering the military construction VA bill on the floor is a big step in the right direction, appropriations-wise. And our work this week doesn't have to end there. As I said, the Appropriations Committee has reported a total of 4 appropriations bills so far. All of them have been bipartisan. And I know that the fiscal year 2026 agricultural appropriations bill is a major priority for all of us, Democrat or Republican, who live in states that depend upon agriculture. Whether it's funding for agricultural research programs, resources for the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, assistance to ranchers to comply with animal disease traceability requirements, the $223 million for the Agricultural Marketing Service to expand markets for American agricultural products, or resources for the Farm Service Agency to ensure that farmers have access to necessary capital, this year's agricultural appropriations bill will be a key resource for farmers and ranchers. Then there's the Commerce, Justice, Science Appropriations Bill, which, among other things, provides essential funding for federal law enforcement officers, as well as support for state and local law enforcement. And there's the fiscal year 2026 Legislative Branch Appropriations Act, which funds the work we do here in Washington for our constituents, and this year also adds additional funding to confront growing threats to member security. Mr. President, I'm very grateful to Chair Collins, Vice Chair Murray, and all of the members of the Senate Appropriations Committee for their work on these bills. And I hope that we'll be able to consider some of these alongside the Milcon VA appropriations bill this week and next. Mr. President, Democrats have indicated that they want a bipartisan appropriations process, and we are giving it to them. And I hope we will see bipartisan passage of appropriation bills on the Senate floor. It was disturbing to see the Democrat leader implicitly threatening to shut down the government in his July Dear Colleague letter. But I'm hopeful that he does not represent the views of Senate Democrats as a whole. Members of both parties should have a strong interest in a regular order bipartisan appropriations process. And I'm pleased that we managed to begin on a bipartisan basis this week. And I hope, Mr. President, that the process will continue in a bipartisan way as we move toward September's deadline. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of a quorum. Mr. President, appropriations season is well underway. The Senate Appropriations Committee has so far passed 6 bipartisan appropriations bills, and Republicans are ready to consider a package of appropriations bills and have a floor process, one that involves serious amendments from both sides of the aisle. Amendments designed to improve the bills, not score political points or sink the bills with poison pill measures. And there have been some encouraging signs that some of my Democrat colleagues are ready to come to the table on this. And I hope that will prove to be true, and that we'll be able to finish an appropriations package in the coming days and then work with the House in August to get the legislation ready to send to the President. We're going to have a lot more appropriations work to do in September, and I will continue to push for a regular order process with debate and amendment on the Senate floor. And hopefully my Democrat colleagues will support that effort. It is in the interest, Mr. President, of both parties to have a regular order bipartisan process. And at least some Democrats have acknowledged as much. It would be nice to see that attitude prevail in the Democrat Party generally. I will say, Mr. President, it was disturbing to see the Democrat leader threaten to shut down the government a few weeks ago, and I really hope the Democrats will not embrace that position. Mr. President, in addition to moving forward on an appropriations package, the other thing we need to get done in short order is a package of nominations. Now, while Senate Republicans have made excellent progress on confirming nominees. We could be a lot farther along if Democrats hadn't so far decided to slow walk every single civilian nomination from the president. I don't need to tell anyone here that it's usual for presidents to get a percentage of their nominees confirmed quickly here in the Senate by either unanimous consent or voice vote. That's been the practice for decades. By this point in his presidency, Joe Biden had had 121 civilian nominees confirmed, and 49 of them had been confirmed by voice vote or unanimous consent. 49, or a full 40%. Mr. President, you want to know how many civilian nominees President Trump has had confirmed by unanimous consent or voice vote? None. 0. 0%. Now, Mr. President, I think it's important, I got a chart here just for purposes of informing people about what this looks like, as I mentioned, over the past several decades. If you start with President H.W. Bush, 41, 98% of his nominees to positions in the federal government were confirmed by either unanimous consent or voice vote. In other words, basically the recognition was that these are people who need to be in these positions, these are important jobs that need to be filled in our government so people can carry out the responsibilities and duties on behalf of our country. 98% of the nominees were confirmed either by unanimous consent or voice in his first term. So let's go back to a Democrat president, Bill Clinton. Same thing, Mr. President. 98% of President Bill Clinton's nominees were confirmed either by unanimous consent or by voice vote. In other words, both sides agreeing in a bipartisan way that it's important to have positions in our government filled. So that's Bill Clinton, Democrat president. Then we had George W. Bush, 43. 90% of his nominees were confirmed either by voice or unanimous consent. 90%. Then you get another Democrat president, Barack Obama. 90% of his nominees were confirmed either by voice or unanimous consent. 90%. Meaning that pretty much everybody here on both sides of the aisle recognized that there are important positions in our government that need to be filled, most of which, or at least many of which, like they are today, are bipartisan when they come out of the committee. Well, then we move into President Trump's first term. That number dropped down to 65. And then, of course, in the Biden administration, Republicans also started to say, well, if the Dems are going to do it, we will too. That number dropped down to 57. But it's still important to point out, Mr. President, that even in the last Democrat presidency with Joe Biden, 57% of his nominees to positions within the federal government were confirmed either by unanimous consent or voice vote here in the United States Senate. And then you look at the current president, President Trump, in second term, 0. This isn't sustainable. We can't keep on this track, Mr. President. This has got to change. And it will change. Either Democrats are going to play ball or we're going to figure out a way to change it. But we can't have a federal government. By the way, there are 1,100 executive branch nominations, which in my view is way too many to start with, that have to come through the Senate for confirmation. 1,100 of them, many of whom at this rate aren't going to get in their jobs before President Trump leaves office. You just can't do this. This isn't a sustainable practice. So something's going to give. The Democrats are going to start to play ball and do what every other Congress, Republican and Democrat, with every other president, Republican and Democrat, has done when it comes to allowing the president who won an election fair and square, and tens of millions of people voted for him, to be able to put his people into their respective offices so they can do the job that the American people, and he can do the job the American people voted for him to do. So I'm just going to say one more time, Mr. President, 0. 0. And as recently as the last presidential administration, a Democrat President Joe Biden, 57% were confirmed by unanimous consent. So let me just say, Mr. President, there are important jobs in the government that are currently standing empty 8 months now into this president's term because Democrats have dragged out the confirmation process and denied President Trump the courtesy that Republicans and Democrats alike in the past have extended to previous presidents. Now, Mr. President, I will say that I do think there are at least some of my colleagues, Democrats on the other side of the aisle, who would like to maintain the kind of courtesy on nominations that prevailed in the Senate before this year. And I'm hoping, really hoping, that those more pragmatic Democrats will prevail and pave the way for us to work together for the next few days to approve a nominations package. We have a lot of bipartisan nominees who are available for consideration right now, and we should be able to quickly approve their nominations. And again, Mr. President, I hope that my Democrat colleagues will come to the table. Otherwise, we're going to be spending a whole lot more time here on the Senate floor. Mr. President, I yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, it's been a good discussion, and I want to reiterate something that was said by the senator from Kansas who chairs the relevant subcommittee and the chairman of the full committee, Senator Collins, when I say that the senator from Maryland was offered an amendment to vote here on the floor of the United States Senate. That is the Article I branch of the government working. You had a markup at the committee. The senator offered his amendment. And yes, there was a lot of swirl when that amendment was offered, but at the end of the day, the committee voted, and the committee defeated it. That's Article I working. Now, if the senator from Maryland wants to see Article I work and have Congress be restored to its constitutional responsibility, the power of the purse, the way to do it is to let us get on these bills and debate them and vote on amendments. That's what we're talking about here. That's what we didn't do last year. He could have had a vote on the floor on the amendment last year, but, oh, that's right, we didn't do Appropriations Bill last year. We're actually trying to restore regular order where people like the senator from Maryland, who has an important role on the Senate Appropriations Committee, has an opportunity in front of all United States senators to get a vote on his amendment. What he is insisting on is a guaranteed result. Well, that doesn't happen here. And in the process, he's holding hostage 99 other senators who want to proceed to this bill. 99 other senators. Because many of them have interest in this legislation. As was pointed out by Senator Moran, there are lots of things funded, programs that are important to senators here on both sides of the aisle. And so we are trying to do something here this year, Mr. President, that wasn't done at all last year, despite the fact that the Appropriations Committee reported 11 of the 12 bills out of the committee last year. Not a single one was brought to the floor for consideration. We are trying to do not one, not two, not three, but 4 appropriations bills with an amendment process that enables senators from all parts of the country to have an opportunity to shape the bill, or in their view, perhaps improve the bill to their liking. And the senator from Maryland has decided that he's going to stand in the way of that because he can't get a guaranteed result. Something that nobody around here is guaranteed. That's why we have votes. And that's what I would love to get back to, is actually voting. Actually putting bills on the floor, having an amendment process, and letting the Senate work its will. Doesn't look like we're going to be able to do that, at least not on that bill. And the unfortunate outcome, as has been pointed out multiple times now, is it probably ends up in some continuing resolution where all the work that was done by the senator from Kansas, the senator from Maryland, the senator from Maine, senator from Washington, and others could very well go by the wayside. And we end up funding the government at some CR level without all the input that all the members of the committee have had up to this point. And I find that really unfortunate. But that's where we are. And so just so everybody understands what happens next, if this consent agreement fails, we'll have to strip out the Commerce, Justice, Science, Appropriations Bill, which carries a lot of things that people have worked for some time on, and then we'll see where it goes from there. But I can't predict the fate of that bill from this point forward. And at least what the senator from Maryland gets, if we get on this package of bills, isn't a vote on his amendment by the United States Senate. He had a vote in committee. We've had process. We got more regular order ahead of us. He is going to hold 99 senators hostage to try and get a guaranteed result on his amendment. It's not the way this place works. And I hope that we can get back to where it works like it's supposed to, where bills come to the floor, we have an open amendment process, and we don't have individual senators blocking the opportunity for every other senator in this country to be heard from. All right, anybody else want to talk? Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, as expected, there's been some Democrat commentary on the process I initiated Monday, a process to restore Senate precedent and codify in Senate rules what was once understood to be standard practice. And that is the Senate acting expeditiously on presidential nominees to allow a president to get his team in place. I will say that the commentary has felt somewhat muted so far, and I suspect that is because Democrats know they don't have a leg to stand on here. After years of partisanship and slowly eroding the confirmation process, they finally went all in and broke it. And they have to know that. And so it's no surprise that they aren't exactly able to mount a compelling defense of their position or a compelling attack on Republicans' move to fix the Senate. On top of that, I suspect it's even possible that some Democrats are secretly relieved that we're restoring Senate precedent. After all, I suspect Democrats would prefer not to reap what they've sowed this Congress. The prospect of blanket obstruction of every single nominee of a Democrat president can't look that attractive. Of course, the Democrat leader's made an attempt to attack Republicans' measure and defend his party's historic obstruction. And one thing he's fixated on is his claim that Democrats' historic obstruction is justified because President Trump has put forward, quote, historically bad nominees. But I'd just like to ask, Mr. President, if these nominees are as historically bad as the Democrat leader claims, why are Democrats voting for them in committee or on the Senate floor? Why have 62 of the 139 civilian nominees the Senate's confirmed so far been confirmed with Democrat support? Why are Trump nominees emerging from committee with bipartisan support? Is the Democrat leader suggesting that his own members are supporting historically bad nominees? On Monday, the Senate Judiciary Committee chairman came down to the floor and asked for unanimous consent to confirm a nominee for U.S. Attorney who was reported from committee by voice vote and who has the support of the 2 Democrat senators from his state. Is this a Democrat leader suggesting that the senior Democrat from Minnesota and the junior Democrat from Minnesota are conspiring with President Trump to put in place historically bad nominees? Mr. President, I completely respect Democrats' right to dislike some, or for that matter, many, of President Trump's nominees, and to oppose nominees that they consider to be historically bad. I've opposed more than one Democrat nominee in my time here. But let's get real here. This obstruction is not about historically bad nominees. The scores of nominees who have emerged from committee with bipartisan support are not historically bad. The U.S. Attorney candidate from Minnesota, supported by the senior Democrat senator from Minnesota and the junior Democrat senator from Minnesota, is not a historically bad nominee. And the only reason the Democrat leader objected to his confirmation by voice vote Monday, along with the confirmation of a Trump nominee who had previously been nominated by President Biden, is petty partisanship. Petty partisanship that is well on its way to turning the Senate from a legislative body into, in the words of the senior Democrat from Minnesota, and I quote, a full-time employment agency, end quote. Mr. President, before I close, I also want to mention one other complaint from the Democrat leader yesterday, and that is his claim that Republicans' attempt to restore Senate precedent on an en bloc consideration of nominees is somehow going to eliminate transparency. To hear the Democrat leader tell it, you'd think the Senate was going to start approving nominees in the dead of night behind closed doors in the Capitol basement. I didn't notice the Democrat leader objecting to a lack of transparency when we approved packages of Biden nominees, some of which probably did happen in the dark of night, albeit in the full light of the C-SPAN cameras. And of course, I should also mention that before any floor consideration, all of these nominees will have gone through the committee process, which will have provided still another forum for members to air concerns. Mr. President, the amendment to the rules Republicans are proposing is an idea with bipartisan pedigree. It would restore Senate precedent. And it would restore sanity to a confirmation process that Democrats and Republicans alike have complained is broken. Now, despite their historic blockade, I think a lot of my Democrat colleagues are well aware that we can't continue as we are. And so I say to those colleagues, many of whom I know do care about this institution, join us. Let's protect decades of Senate precedent on confirmations and get this institution fully functioning again. Mr. President, I understand that there are two bills at the desk due for second readings.
The leader is correct. The clerk will read the titles of the bills for the second time.
S2748, a bill to establish a program to beautify the District of Columbia and so forth and for other purposes. H.R. 4553, an act making appropriations for energy and water development and related agencies for the fiscal year ending September 30, 2026 and for other purposes.
Mr. President, in order to place the bills on the calendar under the provisions of Rule 14, I would object to further proceeding en bloc.
Objection is heard, so the items will be placed on the calendar under Rule 14.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Morning business is closed. Under the previous order, the Senate will resume consideration of S2296, which the clerk will report.
Counter number 115, S2296, a bill to authorize appropriations for fiscal year 2026 for military activities of the Department of Defense and so forth and for other purposes.
Mr. President, I suggest the absence of quorum.
Without objection, clerk will call the roll.
Thank the leader for letting me borrow his chart for a minute. So he's pointed to each of these bar graphs, percentage of Democratic senators who supported Biden CRSs. Yes, that's true. Guess why? In each case, Democrats negotiated with Republicans and said, let's have a bipartisan bill. The leader says it's a clean bill. It's a partisan bill. Not once were Democrats asked for what input should be in the bill. We were not told about it. We were not asked about it, etc. Nor did Speaker Johnson talk to Hakeem Jeffries. You cannot pass legislation in the Senate when it comes to appropriations unless it is bipartisan. So the leader will say it's clean. No, it's not clean because there was no discussion. Every one of these times I went to the Republican leader and said, what do you need? What do you want? And in many cases, we had to significantly change the bill. One of our bills had aid to Ukraine. The Republicans didn't want it. To avoid shutting down the government, we talked to them, negotiated, and took it out. But not once was there any bipartisan discussion or talk on this bill. We wanted to give our Republican colleagues a chance. That's why some of us back in March said, okay. But we saw what happened after that. We saw a decimation of health care in the BBB. So bad right now that 80% of Americans support renewing the tax credits of the ACA. We saw them use rescissions, pocket rescissions, impoundments to undo what was done in the legislative process. So the world has changed, but that one way it's changed, and there are several, and I'll get to those, one way it's changed is there was no discussion. And we asked to have meetings. Hakeem Jeffries and I asked the leader and the speaker to sit down with us as early as July. They didn't. The job of a leader is a bipartisan negotiation. And the appropriators, which you'll say are discussing things. But the two issues we care about, extending the ACA credits, broadly popular with the American people, so they don't want to talk about it, they want to change the subject, and ending these rescissions and impoundments, which would undo what we would do. The four appropriators, when they got down and discussed it, they said that should be for the four leaders to discuss. That's what Thune said. That's what Cole said, the Republican head of appropriations in the House. That's what Collins said. That's what Murray said. That's what DeLauro said. They did not discuss it with us at all. So to say the appropriations process is working is wrong. It's not working. It's not working because the leaders wouldn't discuss it with us, as we discussed with Republicans on every single one of these, what should be in the bill and add to the bill. Please.
So the senator from New York, the way that we've done it, and it's a different business model than the one he used, we actually have the Appropriations Committee sit down. And the date that they came up with, November 21st, was agreed upon by the House and Senate appropriators, Republican and Democrat.
Would the Speaker yield? Would the leader yield?
I will. And the Ukraine issue you're talking about wasn't a CR. That was an entirely different issue. So don't throw that into this mix.
It was not.
But
it was
what
not
we're
an
talking
entirely
about,
different
the
issue.
Democrat leader and his colleagues have the same leverage on November the 21st. This is a short-term CR. This is what we do all the time around here, as witnessed by the chart that you're just using there. 24 pages long, funds of government till November the 21st, at which time you have the same leverage then that you have right now, and we have until the end of the year to fix the ACA credit issue. And we're happy, as I said yesterday and have said on multiple occasions, to sit down with you to do that.
Thank you. Now, reclaiming my time.
Nice.
They did not agree to the bills that the leader is talking about because they said explicitly, Democrat and Republican, there are two issues they can't resolve: impoundments and rescissions and ACA tax credits and health care. And they all agreed, the four of them, that they couldn't agree to a bill until the leaders discussed it with us. We asked the leaders to discuss it with us in July, in the middle of August, at the end of August, in September. They refused. And now he says, give us another 45 days. Well, frankly, the Republicans have had 45 days since March. 145 days, another 45 days, another 45 days. And in the room yesterday, Johnson said he doesn't want to do it at all. He doesn't want to have any compromise. So the time to do it is now. And the idea that we can do it till January, when we talked to the president yesterday, he didn't understand this. But I know that the leader does. On October 1st, in a day or two, millions of Americans, millions, are going to get notices that their insurance premiums will rise an average of $400 a month, $5,000 a year. A middle-class family can't afford that. We want to renew those credits, among other things in health care, but renew those credits so that people won't pay that horrible increase. You can debate health care all you want, but the overwhelming majority of Americans, Democrat, Independent, and even a good number of Republicans, want us to renew those credits. And the impoundment rescission, I mean, what does the leader think? That we should go along, come to an agreement, and then let them undo it unilaterally as they've done once and now have asked to do it more? No way. That's not how you deal with this, and we never had another president who did it. So I repeat, I love this chart. Democrats negotiated with Republicans. Democrats negotiated with Republicans. Democrats negotiated with Republicans, and on through the whole chart. Didn't happen this time. Leader Thune did not come once to me and say, is this bill acceptable? What do you want in the bill? So they call it clean. We call it extremely partisan. Not one discussion, House or Senate, between the two leaders. That is not how you negotiate. And that is not how you pass appropriation bills. And the Appropriations Committee is stalled by their own admission because the leader will not come and talk to us about it. Now, let me make a few other points. Republicans are heading us into a shutdown. We stand at the precipice of a government shutdown because Republicans are not serious about keeping the government open. If you want one glaring instance of that, Speaker Johnson sent his people home. They're home right now, even though the government will conclude at midnight. There's only one conclusion you can draw when the Speaker sends the House home, that he wants a shutdown. He doesn't want to negotiate. All they want to do is force us, try to bully us, and they're not going to succeed, into taking their partisan bill, take it or leave it. That is not how this place works. And that's why we're headed into a shutdown, because Republicans refuse to negotiate a bipartisan bill that deals with the health care needs of the American people, which they care about. Yesterday, Leader Jeffries and I went to the White House to meet with the President and Republican leaders about finding a way out of this impasse. It was a frank and candid discussion. It was long overdue. As I said, we'd asked for it for months. We asked the President to meet with us when Thune and Johnson wouldn't. He said yes. And according to all reports, Johnson and then Leader Thune, who just followed what Johnson wanted, said, don't do it, and the President withdrew. So on Friday, I called Leader Thune and said, let's have a meeting, and we did, but it's at the last minute. There's still a chance. It's only the President who can do this. We know he runs the show here. And he's got to say to our Republican colleagues, deal with this ACA issue so that people don't get $400 premium increases. Deal with this impoundment and rescission issue, which when we told him about it yesterday, he seemed not familiar with it, but now he knows. And we can solve this problem. But Johnson won't, Thune won't, and so the President is not going to be able to persuade them unless he tries at the last minute. That's the only hope here. Look, sitting in the room with the President, it was very clear that the President hadn't fully grasped the magnitude of the disaster he's causing when the government shuts down. As health care costs go up, as people lose their health care, rural hospitals are already closing. Speaker Johnson in the room said to me they're not, and I pointed out to him that Tim Kaine just informed us that 3 rural clinics in Virginia, Southwest Virginia, were closing. And the head of those clinics said it's because of the bills the Republicans passed. The so-called BBB, which we know is not beautiful. The American people know it's not beautiful. And so they know, our Republican colleagues know that the American people are fully behind us when it comes to lowering costs, but also when it comes to health care and making sure that those premiums don't go way up. And then I spoke to Speaker Johnson directly in the room. I told him, because he can't debate health care, because he knows it's not the American people are on the side of wanting these increases, even Republicans, I told him to stop making up stories, that too many Republicans are lying through their teeth. They say, oh, the Democrats want undocumented immigrants to get health care, to get the federal dollars of health care. That is utter bull, and they know it. The law prohibits undocumented immigrants from getting payments from Medicare, Medicaid, or the ACA. There's no money, not a penny, of federal dollars that are going there. So why do they bring this up? Because they're afraid to talk about the real issue, which is health care for American citizens, health care for people who need the health care and can't afford these premiums. Let me say it again. Undocumented immigrants cannot receive premium tax credits by law. So they should stop these lies and address the real issue, which of course they're afraid to do. A standard Republican MO. A standard Republican MO is to make something else up because the American people are on our side. Now, this week, here's what House Republicans sent out guidance to their members. They said, quote, not to make the message about health care because Republicans lose that argument. They're right. Their position is callous, malicious, unpopular. So they're not only refusing to talk about health care, but apparently when they do, it's only to spread misinformation, to spread lies. I said this to Speaker Johnson in the Oval Office yesterday. I told him it was total bull, I think that's the word I used, to say that we want undocumented immigrants to get federal benefits, that it can't happen by law, and nothing we've proposed in our bill changes that. He sort of smirked, that's it, because he knows the truth. He knows the truth. And they're lying to the American people, these Republicans who use this, because they know how unpopular their position is. Kaiser Family Foundation poll, 75% of Americans support extending the ACA premium tax credit, including 63% of Republicans. Republicans have chosen the losing side of the health care debate because they're trying to take away people's health care. They're going to let people's premiums rise. And this idea that we can do this at January, no. The notices go out October 1st as to how much increase people will get in 29 states, and they only have a short time, long before January, to decide, are they going to drop their health care because they can't afford it? Are they going to take a lesser plan where they pay more through deductibles and co-payments? Or are they going to keep that plan and cut back on buying a car, going on a vacation, or worse? Republicans have chosen, simply put, folks, the Republicans have chosen the losing side of the health care debate. Losing side. And in the White House meeting yesterday, Speaker Johnson made it perfectly clear he didn't care if people's premiums should go up because his conference is against it. And so again, the House isn't even set to come back until October 7th. You tell me which side is actively manufacturing a shutdown. Why did the House do that? Because they wanted to negotiate? I don't think so. They wanted to jam it through, but they're not going to be able to. Yesterday, during a House Republican conference, Representative Lisa McClain made it explicit. She said, don't talk about health care to her Republican colleagues. They don't want to talk about it, so they make these other things up, facts out of thin air. So the Republicans have until midnight tonight to get serious with us about solving this crisis and keep the government open. But right now, they're not even talking to us seriously. They're sort of in la-la land. And then on another issue, related. Yesterday, the president posted an offensive deepfake AI video of Leader Jeffries and me. with sombreros, fake music, impersonating my voice through AI, it wasn't me, talking even more lies about health care and immigration. Listen to this, America. Hours away from a shutdown, which we don't want, the American people don't want, the president is busy trolling away on the internet like a 10-year-old. And that's exactly why Americans are going to blame him if the government shuts down. That's another proof point as to who is to blame. His video, Johnson going away and adjourning the House till next week. We have less than a day to figure this out, and Donald Trump is busy tweeting deep fakes. It's not like he's in touch with reality. He's in a bubble. He doesn't understand that if the government shuts down, people's health care premiums will go up. When we told him about it, Hakeem and I, yesterday, by his body language, he seemed not even to be aware of it, of the ramifications. If the president was smart, he'd move heaven and earth to fix this health care crisis right away, because Americans are going to hold him responsible when they start paying $400, $500, $4,600 more a month on health care. So we have less than a day. If there was ever a moment for Donald Trump and Republicans to get serious about health care, it's now. But even right now, even this morning, even here on the precipice of this crisis, the president would rather troll on the internet and lie about health care than tell the truth and get to work. So that's why the polls are abundantly clear that Americans will hold Donald Trump and Republicans responsible if the government shuts down. Senate Republicans could stop this crisis now. The president should get on the phone with Leader Thune and the Johnsons and tell them to work with Democrats to fix the crisis before it's too late, and work with Democrats to fix our health care crisis. Let me just say once again, we tried over and over and over again to meet with the Republican leadership. They said no. The appropriators said they couldn't resolve the issues until the leaders met. So we asked the leaders to meet again, and they said no, because they didn't want to negotiate. They wanted it their way or no way. Their way or no way. That's not how the Senate works. If Republicans cause a shutdown, they'll probably keep lying and distracting because they know we're on the side of the American, Democrats are on the side of the American people. But we will continue to focus on health care, and the American people will be completely on our side. Yield the floor.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be lifted.
Without objection.
Mr. President, it's been 2 weeks since our first vote on a clean continuing resolution to keep the government open. The shutdown could have been avoided well before it began. But because Democrats have not budged from their partisan demands, the shutdown is now entering its third day. Now, Mr. President, there's a lot that we could be doing right now. We could be considering bipartisan appropriations bills through regular order, going to conference on the 3 appropriations bills we passed in August, or passing the bipartisan annual defense bill. But instead, we're stuck in a shutdown mess of Democrats' making. And the American people are suffering as a result. Mr. President, Republicans remain united around a clean, nonpartisan funding extension. It's passed the House of Representatives, and it's currently sitting right here in the Senate, ready to be voted on. It has no new Republican policies, no partisan policy riders. It's straightforward, simple, and clean. All it does is reopen the government through November the 21st to give us more time to pass appropriations bills here on the floor. We have a number of bipartisan bills waiting for floor consideration right now. The only thing standing in the way of reopening the government and getting back to doing the important work is Democrats' $1.5 trillion in partisan spending demands. That's right, $1.5 trillion. Their partisan proposal demands more money, think about this, more money than our entire defense budget just to keep the government open for 4 weeks. That's not a credible proposal. It's a far-left wish list. And it's not how we're going to do things around here. Mr. President, we can end this shutdown in just a few hours. We need to take one roll call vote just one roll call vote on the House-passed clean continuing resolution, the President of the United States says that he's ready to sign it. We just need a handful of Democrats to agree. Now, once we get the government back open, then we can talk about the issues that Democrats are raising. But we can't do that while they're holding the federal government hostage to their partisan demands. Mr. President, whatever Democrats are saying publicly, I think privately they are all well aware of the problems with their current position. The senior senator from Massachusetts has said, and I quote, "Hostage tactics are the last resort for those who can't win their fights through elections, can't win their fights in Congress, can't win their fights for the presidency, and can't win their fights in the courts," end quote. The Democrat leader called shutdowns, and I quote, "a politics of idiocy, of confrontation, of paralysis," end quote. Mr. President, this shutdown needs to end sooner rather than later. And there's only one way out of it. Democrats need to vote for the clean, nonpartisan, continuing resolution sitting right there. All it takes is one roll call vote. The government's back open. And Mr. President, we need to get this government back open, which we can do very, very quickly. And then we can talk about whatever we need to talk about. Just a few years ago, the Democrat leader had this to say, and I quote again, "We're allowed to come here and disagree over policy. In fact, our system of government was designed to allow for progress, despite our large and sometimes raucous differences. But when one side throws a temper tantrum and uses the basic functioning of our government as leverage in a policy argument, our system of government breaks down," end quote. Well, Mr. President, let's hope the Democrat leader decides to heed his own words and the Democrats' temper tantrum ends sooner rather than later. Mr. President, later today, a couple hours, Democrats will have another opportunity to vote for the clean continuing resolution. And we'll see if they're still committed to their shutdown politics. Republicans remain ready to reopen the government and to get back to doing the American people's business. How much longer this shutdown lasts depends entirely on Democrats. The choice is theirs. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President, quote, "every day gets better for us," end quote. So said the Democrat leader in an interview published on Thursday, hours before Democrats once again voted to keep the government closed and to deny service members a paycheck. Federal workers, including law enforcement officers, missed part of their pay last Friday. But hey, at least life is getting better for Senate Democrats. Mr. President, a CNN article from Thursday said that Democrats are preparing to keep on with this shutdown for, and I quote, "several more weeks." I guess Democrats are not going to be satisfied until military families and government workers are lining up at food banks or visiting payday lenders or simply charging necessary items like milk and bread on their credit cards to be repaid later if they can, along with the big interest charges that come with that. But hey, while military families and government workers may be deeply stressed, at least life is getting better every day for Senate Democrats. Mr. President, I could at least understand a little bit more where Democrats are coming from if Republicans were asking them to swallow a lot of new Republican policies to reopen the government. But Republicans aren't asking Democrats for anything. We're not asking them to support any new Republican policies. We're not asking them to swallow any partisan policy riders. We have put forward, and the House has passed, a clean, nonpartisan CR. That's the bill Democrats are rejecting. And by the way, you certainly don't have to take my word for it that we put forward a clean bill. Here's what one mainstream news publication said last week, and I quote, "It's important to note that Democrats instigated this shutdown. They rejected a clean funding proposal and demanded significant and expensive health care policy changes in exchange for their votes," end quote. it's important to note that Democrats instigated this shutdown. They rejected a clean funding proposal and demanded significant and expensive health care policy changes in exchange for their votes. End quote. Yeah, that pretty much captures it right there in a nutshell, Mr. President. Now, Democrats like to whine that Republicans aren't negotiating, but negotiation, Mr. President, is what you do when each side has a list of demands and you need to meet in the middle. Republicans, as I and a lot of other people have pointed out, haven't put forward any demands. Only Democrats have made demands. And by the way, very expensive demands. And they've taken government funding hostage in an attempt to force through their partisan measures. Mr. President, I remember when Democrats used to care about the effects of a government shutdown. In fact, I could fill a whole speech, many speeches actually, with quotes from Democrats talking about how terrible shutdowns are. I used to think they were sincere in those opinions, but it's become abundantly clear that their previous statements weren't based on principle, but on political advantage. Democrats were against shutdowns when it suited their political purposes, and now that it suits their political purposes, they think, to keep the government closed, now they support shutdowns. I suspect their political calculations are flawed, because after all, 65% of voters think Democrats should reopen the government instead of holding out for their partisan demands. But I guess, Mr. President, Democrats are more worried about gaining the approval of their far-left base than about getting the approval of everyday Americans. Mr. President, it's day 14 of Democrat shutdown. Our economy is losing billions of dollars. Federal workers, including law enforcement officers, are going without pay. Critical government programs are in jeopardy. But hey, at least life is getting better every day for Senate Democrats. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of a quorum. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, this morning we will offer my Democrat colleagues yet another opportunity to vote to reopen the government. To vote to reopen the government with a clean, nonpartisan CR. That's right, we are not asking Democrats to swallow any new Republican policies. We're not asking them to swallow any partisan policy riders. We're simply asking them to extend current funding levels for a few weeks while we work on full-year appropriations. And you don't have to take my word for it. Everyone from the president of the Teamsters Union to mainstream media outlets has confirmed that the CR Republicans have put forward is a clean CR. But Senate Democrats chose to shut down the government anyway. Now, Mr. President, Democrats' ostensible reason for their 16-day shutdown is because they want Republicans to agree to bail out the health care mess that Democrats created, first with Obamacare, and then by passing and then sunsetting enhanced Obamacare tax credits that were put in place for the COVID emergency, which I think, as we all know, is long behind us. And despite the fact that we're only in this position because of Democrats' poor policy choices, Republicans are ready for that discussion. I'm ready. My colleagues are ready. The Speaker and the President are ready. But, Mr. President, only once we've reopened the government. We're not conducting negotiations in a hostage situation. And we're not going to pay $1.5 trillion ransom to get Democrats to reopen government operations. That's right, Mr. President, $1.5 trillion. That's what Democrats are demanding. Between their Obamacare bailout and the other partisan policies that they've included, they want a $1.5 trillion ransom to reopen the government for a handful of weeks. Now, to put that number in perspective, that's the equivalent to almost 1/4 of the entire 2024 federal budget. Again, just to reopen the federal government for a handful of weeks. Now think about that, Mr. President. Their proposal, $1.5 trillion in new spending, free health care benefits for non-citizens, to open the government until October 31st. That's what their proposal is. So literally, the American taxpayer is supposed to pay $1.5 trillion so that the Democrats can open the government until Halloween, 2 weeks from now. $1.5 trillion for 2 weeks. That's what we're talking about here. Now just imagine for a minute, Mr. President, what might happen if we pay that ransom and agree to the Democrats' $1.5 trillion demand. Well, what's going to happen the next time we need a continuing resolution? How much are Democrats going to demand then? Will we have to add another $1.5 trillion every time we want to fund the government? And they want to do it for 2 weeks. $1.5 trillion for 2 weeks. I mean, where does this end? When taxpayers and our economy have been totally destroyed by Democrats' profligate spending, is that where it ends? No, Mr. President. While I am more than happy to discuss ways to alleviate Democrats' health care mess, we're not paying $1.5 trillion, a $1.5 trillion ransom to reopen the federal government. Now, Mr. President, as frustrated as I am with their continued refusal to reopen the government, I do have to say that I have some sympathy for Senate Democrats. While they may claim health care is the driver of what they're doing, we all know that the primary reason we're in this mess is because Democrats' far-left base demanded a showdown with President Trump. Just 7 months ago, the Democrat leader voted with Republicans to keep the government open because he said, while he didn't like the CR, a government shutdown would be, quote, much worse. Far worse, end quote. But he caught a whole lot of flack for that decision from the far left. And so now, he's leading the shutdown charge. He's not the only Democrat who voted to fund the government in March. He's now a member of the Shutdown Brigade. But, Mr. President, no matter how much pressure their far-left base is exerting, we still need some Democrats to do the right thing. It would take just a handful of Democrats to reopen the government. Just a handful of Democrats to enable us to resume paying air traffic controllers, law enforcement officers, and all of the other federal workers. Just a handful of Democrats to get the federal government working again for the American people. Later today, Democrats are going to have another opportunity to make the right decision. 2 opportunities, in fact. They're going to have a chance to vote on the clean, nonpartisan CR, which, as I said, in the past sits right there at the desk, which has passed the House of Representatives. We can pick this up with 5 more Democrat votes, pass it today, send it to the President signs it into law, and the government reopens. So they're going to have a chance to vote on that yet again. And they're going to have a chance to vote to advance full-year defense appropriations legislation, so that if we can't reopen the entire government, we can at least make some progress toward securing paychecks for our troops and for defending our country. Just last week, the Senate passed the National Defense Authorization Act, which is essential legislation, something that we do every year to authorize defense spending and to authorize a pay raise for our troops. So this is Democrats' chance to make good on that promise by funding the raise. The authorization bill authorized it. The defense appropriations bill that we will vote on here later today will actually fund that raise so our troops can get paid. Now again, I realize that Democrats' far-left base is rallying in D.C. this weekend, which puts extra pressure on Democrats. But I hope that they'll do the right thing anyway and vote to reopen the government. All we need is 5. Bill's right there. Goes to the president, he signs into law. Government reopens. Mr. President, the American people are depending on some, I'm hoping, Democrats who are willing to put the interest of the American people ahead of the interests of their far-left base. Mr. President, I yield the floor. I seek quorum. Mr. President, just to remind our colleagues, we've had now a series 3 votes and a couple of them on judges, but one of the votes in there was on a Senator Johnson proposal that would have paid all federal employees who are currently working in the middle of a shutdown. Now, I don't know how you explain, if you have any federal employees, how you would vote against something that would make sure that in the middle of a government shutdown, if they continue to work, that they get paid. That's all it was. Very simple, very straightforward. And I, for the life of me, again, I think the other side is in a very bad headspace right now to vote against something like that. If you have any federal employees in your state, obviously a lot of them here in this area, all of our staffs are currently not getting paid. Senator Johnson tried to correct that today by calling up a bill, which we just voted on, in which, once again, Democrats here in this chamber voted against. We've had in front of us, we've had a dozen votes now on a continuing resolution that would open up the government. It's been sitting at the desk now for some time. The House has passed it. We need 5 Democrats to join us. Send it to the President. He will sign it into law. The government opens up. It's clean. It's nonpartisan. It has no policy riders, no partisan gimmicks attached to it. It's a straightforward continuing resolution to fund the government until a certain time. And Senator Johnson's was even more straightforward than that, really, because it simply said that if you are a federal employee and you are currently working today, like everybody here in this chamber, you will get paid. And again, it's I can't explain what's going on, and on the other side of the aisle, but they consistently come down here and vote against paying people who are working every single day and not getting paid. So, Mr. President, that was the vote we had just a couple of votes ago. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the post-cloture time with respect to the Tableson nomination be expired and the Senate vote on confirmation of the nomination at a time to be determined by the Majority Leader in consultation with the Democratic Leader no earlier than Monday, October the 27th. Further, if confirmed, the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table and the President be immediately notified of the Senate's action.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I move to proceed to legislative session. Suspended.
Without objection.
And I move to proceed to calendar number 168, H.R. 5371.
Clerk will report.
Motion to proceed to calendar 168, H.R. 5371, an act making continuing appropriations and extensions for fiscal year 2026 and for other purposes.
Thank you. Mr. President, we're now in day 29 of the Democrat government shutdown, and I say that because it is a Democrat shutdown. Now, the Democrats are out there publicly saying, well, this is the Republicans who are responsible for shutting down the government, notwithstanding the fact that the House of Representatives has passed a bill sitting right here that with 5 more Democrats we could pick up and pass, put on the President's desk, he would sign it into law, and the government would reopen. Those are the simple facts. Those are indisputable facts. Now, what it suggests to me, however, when they say that it's the Republicans' fault or somehow the Republicans are responsible for shutting the government down, it really defies facts. It defies history. It defies reality. Because as everybody who's been around here knows, we have now voted 13 times. 13 times on that bill sitting at the desk that would open up the government, put everybody back to work, and all the pain that is being caused by the American people would go away. 13 times we've had that vote. Now, interestingly enough, that matches the number of times the Democrats passed a clean CR when they had the majority. The last 4 years under President Biden, 13 different occasions, they voted for a clean continuing resolution to fund the government. And at the time, they talked about how terrible it is that, you know, the government should be taken hostage and you have a dispute over other issues. You had tons of statements. I mean, I could spend all day just repeating the statements that Democrats made over and over and over again about the importance of funding the government and not taking it hostage to discuss other issues. The record is replete with statements like that coming out of the Democrats. So 13 times they have voted against funding the government right here. 13 times while they were in the majority, they voted for a clean continuing resolution. Now explain that logic to the American people, who are the ones that are experiencing the pain and the consequence of their shutdown. I think the American people understand what's going on here. We consistently see that, and so much so that you even have the organizations, the unions around the country have come out now. You got the American Federation of Government Employees, you got the Teamsters, you got at least part of the Air Traffic Controllers Union, all have endorsed a clean funding resolution. That to me suggests that the American people, it is resonating with them about who's responsible for this government shutdown. But don't take my word for who it is. Take the Democrats' own words. If you look at what's been said by some of the Democrat leadership here, just in the last few days since the government actually shut down, that, of course, is the Democrat leader, Senator Schumer, who said every day gets better for us, commenting about the government shutdown. And my simple observation is, better for who? For you? Because you think you're winning politically? What about the air traffic controllers? What about the TSA agents? What about the American troops? What about our Border Patrol agents? What about the people who work in this building? What about the 40 million Americans that are going to not get SNAP benefits starting on Saturday if the government doesn't open up? But every day gets better, according to Senator Schumer. And then, of course, this last week, there was the House Democrat whip who said, of course, there will be families that are going to suffer, but it is one of the few leverage times we have. Of course, there are families that are going to suffer. Yeah, true. But doesn't matter, because we got leverage. Then, of course, we have a third one here, one of our colleagues here in the Senate, the senator from Delaware, who said this in an interview: frankly, this is our only moment of leverage, and although a very unpleasant tool to use. Yeah, it's unpleasant. It's unpleasant unless you're a Democrat who thinks that this gives you a moment of leverage. So, lest there be any question about who is responsible for shutting the government down, make no mistake about it. These guys are the ones who are out there bragging about it getting better for us every single day. Or we have more leverage now. Mr. President, this has gone on long enough. We've made it abundantly clear that this is not about what the Democrats say it's about. It's about the President in the White House. This is TDS. This is Trump derangement syndrome on steroids. And they are asking the American people to pay the price for that. 13 times when Biden was president, they had no issues with funding the federal government with a clean CR. Now we bring a clean, nonpartisan CR, no partisan riders, no policies, Republican policies attached, just funds the government. Comes over from the House a month ago now. We put it here just asking a handful of Democrats to join us because, as we know, it takes 60 in the Senate. And I think most people understand that. I mean, they're trying to ignore the fact now that the Republicans have control of Washington. They have the House, the Senate, and the White House. Anybody who follows this knows that in the United States Senate, The rules, the procedures in the Senate by which we operate and are governed require a 60-vote threshold. So it takes more than 51, meaning, since we have 53 Republicans, it's going to take a handful of Democrats. Well, we've been able to generate 55 votes consistently now, 13 different times, for funding the government, opening up the government, but we need 5 more. So the question is, are there 5 people over there with a backbone, 5 courageous Democrats, 5 Democrats who don't buy this, who don't believe that they ought to be using the American people as leverage, try and win a political battle? Are there 5 Democrats over there who believe that we ought to do what's in the best interest of the American people, the best interests of the air traffic controllers and the TSA agents, and the men and women in uniform, and the SNAP recipients that starting on Saturday are going to go without food assistance? This is not a game. You're playing with real people's lives. Now, in the Washington world, in the political world, they may think that they are winning this debate because it gives them leverage. But in the real world, where real people live, people are hurting. People here aren't getting paid. Federal workers aren't getting paid. As of Friday, last paycheck. Air traffic controllers, paychecks started going away yesterday. So, I'm still hopeful. I remain hopeful that there are enough sane Democrats who are not so afflicted with Trump derangement syndrome, because that is what this is about, fundamentally. Nothing more, nothing less, nothing else. This is about Trump derangement syndrome. And it has broken out over here in a way unlike anything I've seen in my time here. Disagree with the president, that's fine. Come down here, make statements, cast votes. Don't take the American people hostage and make them pay the price because you think that every day this is getting better for us. Now, Mr. President, the Democrat leader was on the floor yesterday morning claiming that once again Republicans don't want to talk about fixing health care. And let me just say, Mr. President, for the 1,282nd time, that Republicans are more than happy to have a discussion about health care. We should have a discussion about health care because Democrats' signature health care law has done exactly nothing to address the problem of rising health care costs. We were promised, of course, that it would. We were, in fact, promised that Democrats' signature law would fix our entire health care system. This is a quote. An historic bill that will finally reform our broken health care system and help millions of families and small businesses get the coverage they need at a price they can afford, end quote. That from the senior Democrat senator from Washington, speaking of Obamacare back in 2009. Or to quote President Obama himself, this law will cut costs and make coverage more affordable for families and small businesses, end quote. Cut costs and make coverage more affordable for families and small businesses. Except, of course, it didn't. And what has been very striking about the last few weeks is that Democrats are at least now admitting that. Oh yeah, they're saying it, they're not saying it straight out, but every time they talk about Americans facing a health care crisis, they are admitting that their signature health care law failed, that it did not address the problem of high health care costs, that it did not make health care more affordable for hardworking Americans. Now, Mr. President, I could go down the list of Obamacare's broken promises. If you like your health insurance, you can keep it. Not true. If you like your doctor, you can keep him or her. Not true. Premium costs will go down. Not true. Exactly the opposite. You look at since 2013 to today, what premium costs have done in the individual marketplace on the exchanges, it is a line like this. Suffice it to say, as Democrats are now implicitly admitting that Obamacare massively failed in its aims, Democrats, of course, now want to put a Band-Aid on a gaping wound by extending the Biden COVID bonuses. But of course, extending those credits will do nothing to fix the underlying problem, which is that health care costs will continue to spiral under Obamacare. Throwing $350 billion in taxpayer dollars at the problem in the form of enhanced tax credits will do nothing to stop Obamacare premiums from going up by double digits, because that is what they have been doing. And it will do nothing to improve health care for the majority of Americans who are not on Obamacare health plans, like our seniors, our most vulnerable citizens, and those who get their coverage through their employer. Mr. President, while Democrats are, shall we say, shaky on the facts when it comes to their dramatic health care speeches, while Obamacare premiums are increasing, the median plan premium is not, in fact, going to double next year. It is absolutely true that Democrats have created real health care problems. And as I've said more times than I can count, Republicans are ready and willing to have a discussion about those problems and about how we lower costs for hardworking Americans. We are, in fact, eager to have that discussion. The President is willing to have Democrats over to discuss it next week if they vote to reopen the government. Because in the words of the Democrat leader back in 2013, we are not going to negotiate with a gun to our heads. That's what he said. This is a serious matter. And I know Democrats think you can solve any problem simply by throwing billions of taxpayer dollars at it. The record's pretty clear on that. But you can't. Genuine remedies for the problem of soaring health care costs are not going to be arrived at with a brief late-night session behind closed doors in the Democrat leader's office. We need extended, serious bipartisan work with input from all senators. And we need Democrats to reopen the government so that work can start. Republicans are brimming over with health care ideas, from cost-sharing reductions to actually lower health care or health plan costs, I should say, to association health plans, to ways to stop Obamacare's spiral of enriching insurers at the expense of everyday Americans. In fact, we already took steps to make health care more affordable and accessible when we passed the One Big Beautiful Bill this summer, which expanded health savings accounts and telehealth for Americans, to say nothing of investing heavily in rural health care and ensuring that our health care entitlement programs are focused on those most in need. So I say, we are looking forward to having a real discussion with Democrats. But to quote another Democrat senator, the junior Democrat from Connecticut, there is a time and a place to debate health care, just like there is a time and a place to debate energy policy and immigration and education, but not when the funding of the federal government and all the lives that are impacted by it hang in the balance, end quote. Mr. President, there are a lot of Americans suffering right now because of the Democrats' month-long shutdown. And the suffering increases every day. It's time. It's past time for Democrats to reopen the government. And once they do, Republicans look forward to having some serious discussions about how to address rising health care costs and the failures of the Democrats' signature health care law. Now, Mr. President, before I close, I'd like to mention a bill that Democrats are reportedly going to attempt to move by unanimous consent today. And I would just say that after a month of steadily increasing pain, thanks to the Democrats' shutdown, Democrats have apparently woken up to the fact that in 3 days, they're going to be responsible for SNAP recipients starting to go without food stamps. So what are Democrats doing? Are they making plans to end their shutdown and reopen the government? Nope. They're going to propose a bill to fund food stamps during their shutdown. That's right. Democrats don't want the bad press of hungry Americans. But they're also apparently unwilling to even contemplate ending their month-long shutdown. So they're trying to insulate themselves with this bill. Mr. President, do you know what's not in this bill? Paychecks for our troops. Paychecks for law enforcement officers and federal firefighters. Paychecks for air traffic controllers. Paychecks for other government workers. Funding for rental and housing assistance. Funding for small business loan programs. Funding for farm loan programs. Funding for tribal programs. Funding for Head Start. Funding for rural development programs. Funding for National Guard training. Funding for telehealth services. Shall I go on? Because I'm happy to. Every one of those programs I've mentioned has either run out of money, is running out of money, or is otherwise in jeopardy because of the Democrats' government shutdown. And the Democrats' bill would do nothing to support even one of those programs. Thanks to Democrats, federal workers are lining up at food banks. The Democrats' bill is certainly not going to help them as they struggle to pay the rent, or the electric bill, or make their car payment. Mr. President, enough is enough. This bill is a cynical attempt to provide political cover for Democrats to allow them to carry on their government shutdown even longer. And we're not going to let them pick winners and losers. It's time to fund everybody. And the bill sitting at the desk right there does that. We just need 5 brave Democrats. If Democrats really want to fund SNAP and WIC, we have a bill for them. A clean, nonpartisan CR to fund SNAP, WIC, and the entire federal government. Or we could pass the Agricultural Appropriations Bill the Democrats have been resisting behind closed doors. That would fund SNAP, WIC, and our farm and conservation programs, not to mention ensuring salaries for the people who inspect our food and support our farmers. I'm happy to bring that up right now. Mr. President, Democrats have spent a month now, playing with people's livelihoods because the far left wing of their party won't let them accept a clean, nonpartisan CR. Enough is enough. We're not giving Democrats political cover. If they want to prevent damage from their shutdown, then they can end their shutdown. The bill's right there at the desk. And I will call a vote the minute Democrats tell me they have enough votes to fund the government. The ball's really in their court, Mr. President. Is this what you want the American people to think? That you're willing to give them enormous amounts of pain and adverse consequence so that you can gain leverage, political leverage. It's time to end it, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
The Democratic leader.
In a few minutes, my good colleague from New Mexico, Senator Lujan, will be offering a unanimous consent request. And I want to thank him for his extraordinary leadership on the issue of SNAP, leading the way on an urgent issue for millions of Americans. Now, right now, we're facing down 2 crises at once, a health care crisis and a hunger crisis. And both are caused by and intensified by one man and one man only, Donald Trump. We're now 3 days away from open enrollment. And now, for the first time in history, a president is refusing to fund SNAP during a shutdown. 42 million Americans, young children who need food, veterans who might have PTSD and need help, senior citizens who rely on SNAP to help feed themselves, and so many others, people who are out of work because they lost their jobs through no fault of their own, need SNAP. And why are we not doing it? Not because the money's gone. It's there. Not because it's not permitted. It's legal. But because Donald Trump ordered it stopped. It falls on his shoulders. Let's be clear. This does not need to happen. Never before, under any president, Republican or Democrat, has SNAP been cut off during a shutdown. We're not talking about it. We're talking with the shutdown. We all know our position. We need a negotiation. But this SNAP doesn't have to happen in any case, and only because Donald Trump is doing it, and the Republican leadership goes along with Donald Trump to let SNAP expire. Trump did this once before. In 2019, he funded SNAP during his last shutdown. Back then, Trump kept SNAP funded. This time, he's deliberately pulling the plug, even though in September he said he would fund it and could fund it, independent of any shutdown. Trump is weaponizing hunger. He's using kids and parents as pawns. Donald Trump is a vindictive politician and a heartless man. Just a few weeks ago, Trump's own USDA confirmed it had $6 billion in emergency funds to keep food and aid flowing. When asked about SNAP, Trump assured everyone it will be fine. He said it. Then suddenly last Friday, Trump ordered USDA to delete the plan, take it off their website, and refuse to use the money. No reason, no explanation, just cruelty. 2/3 of SNAP recipients are kids, seniors, or people with disabilities. That's who Trump is cutting off. Kids who rely on school meals, seniors on fixed incomes, veterans trying to get by, families trying to get groceries. That's the real-world consequence of Trump's decision. And while he's manufacturing two crises here at home, where's his focus? Overseas, on a ballroom, on sending $40 billion to Argentina. There's money for Argentina, but not for SNAP. And the Argentina money far exceeds the money needed for SNAP for at least a whole month. Every president before him, Democrat and Republican, has used the same funds to keep families fed. Trump could fix this today with one stroke of his pen. We don't have to wait. We don't have to discuss. We don't have to deliberate. Let's be clear. Republicans have been on a crusade against SNAP all year. They slashed it by a historic $200 billion this summer in their so-called big, beautiful bill to pay for tax cuts for billionaires, and now they're doubling down, using this shutdown to devastate families and leave kids hungry. It's heartless, it's cynical, and it's wrong. Well, Senate Democrats are not waiting, and that's why I'm so grateful for Senator Lujan. In a few minutes, we'll force a vote to avert this avoidable crisis. I thank Senator Lujan, I thank him for championing the Keep SNAP and WIC Funded Act, which will make sure that 42 million Americans don't lose their benefits. It will make sure 7 million moms and babies on WIC aren't left behind. It's simple, it's moral, it's urgent. And if the other side wouldn't block it, I bet you it would pass overwhelmingly. And there's another bill by Senator Hawley, Republican, conservative. I believe it has 11 Republican co-sponsors already. So it's another bill that could pass. It doesn't have WIC, but it does SNAP. Democrats are ready to do what every president in American history has done, except for Trump, avert this problem. We're willing to work with anyone to get this bill on the floor and stop this cruelty. But right now, unfortunately, Senate Republicans, frozen, paralyzed by fear or cynicism, while enabling Trump to use millions of hungry Americans as political hostages. Senate Republicans should let this bill pass, and I yield to Senator Lujan for unanimous consent request.
The senator from New Mexico.
Mr. President, I rise today to ask my colleagues to pass my Keep SNAP and WIC Funded Act of 2025, which has the backing of the entire Democratic caucus, the Democratic members of this Senate. Now, we all know access to food is a human right. It's that simple. And we're all fortunate enough to live in the United States of America, a nation that's rich, it's abundant, a nation that's rich in agricultural tradition, can be abundant in harvest. Now, in a nation blessed with such abundance, allowing our fellow Americans to go hungry is sadly right now a policy decision. I would argue a political decision, not a financial necessity. Now, the Trump administration has yet again made the decision, made the choice to allow our fellow Americans to go hungry. Now, let's be clear. The only way to ensure that SNAP benefits are issued by November 1st is for the Trump administration to release the billions of dollars it has sitting in an account at USDA that Congress appropriated. Democrats and Republicans working together to appropriate, to use for this purpose. As a matter of fact, never in the history of the United States has SNAP been allowed to lapse like this. As a matter of fact, during President Trump's first term, Secretary Perdue, President Trump, they tapped this same fund to allow SNAP benefits to continue to roll. Now, President Trump says that the use of SNAP contingency funds is illegal. Well, here's the document that was taken down from the USDA website that was up just days ago. He decided to take this down, and now even the Speaker of the House is lying to the American people, saying that it's not allowed. President Trump found $40 billion in U.S. taxpayer dollars to send to his political allies in Argentina just last week. But when it comes to feeding our own people here in the United States of America, he refuses to act. Back home in New Mexico, 1 in 5 people rely on SNAP. They aren't strangers. They're neighbors, coworkers, friends, children, people I go to church with. They're the folks we say hello to at the grocery store or at a Little League game. President Trump's refusal to release SNAP funding doesn't just impact New Mexico. States like Louisiana, where Speaker Johnson is from, are facing the same crisis. Louisiana is third on the list of constituents that will be negatively impacted. Now, I've been fortunate enough to visit several food banks across New Mexico and meet with community members who are working around the clock to make sure neighbors have something to eat. To every one of our community members who have stepped up, I want to say thank you, not just across New Mexico, but across America. I am proud to represent a community that takes care of each other when times are tough. It shouldn't have to be this way. Since the creation of SNAP, there's never been a lapse. There's never been a lapse in SNAP funding during a government shutdown. The Trump administration has the authority and the funds to keep SNAP running during this shutdown. And don't take my word for it. Look at the USDA's own guidance that they removed from their website that justifies this. Any failure to do so right now falls squarely on the Trump administration and Republicans. We could vote on this today, on this bill or one that Senator Hawley's authored as well that has many Republican colleagues that are co-sponsors to prevent a hunger crisis. This pain does not need to happen. President Trump is choosing to inflict pain on American families by holding meals hostage. That's why I'm leading this legislation to ensure no child, parent, or veteran misses a meal because of the Republican shutdown. It also says that if states, tribal governments are in a position right now to actually fund SNAP programs, that they do get reimbursed, unlike what President Trump has been threatening them that they will not. We cannot stand by and let our neighbors go hungry. So I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, and I appreciate everyone that's reached out to my office to have a conversation about this piece of legislation. I hope we can work together, we find a path forward. But I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to come together to pass this bill now, fund SNAP, fund WIC, before this hunger crisis hits our communities. So, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to immediate consideration of S. 3071, introduced earlier today, that the bill be considered read 3 times and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there an objection?
Mr. President.
The Majority Leader.
Thank you. Reserving the right to object, let me just point out, if I might, that we are 29 days into a Democrat shutdown. And the senator from New Mexico was absolutely right. SNAP recipients shouldn't go without food. People should be getting paid in this country. And we've tried to do that 13 times. And you voted no 13 times. This isn't a political game. These are real people's lives that we're talking about. And you all have just figured out, 29 days in, that, oh, there might be some consequences. There are people who run out of money. Yeah, we're 29 days in. And they've done their best to make sure that a lot of these programs are funded. But at some point, the government runs out of money. 13 times, people over here voted to fund SNAP. 13 times they voted to fund WIC. My aching back. Finally realized this thing has consequences. Well, you know what? What Democrats are doing here, they're making plans to keep the shutdown going. And they realize, all of a sudden, 29 days in, that this is a real consequence, real life pain for American families, something that results from their shutdown. So are they making plans to end the shutdown and reopen the government? Nope. They're going to propose a bill to fund food stamps during their shutdown. Mr. President, this request is a transparent admission that Democrats want to keep the shutdown for what? Another month? Longer? This bill is a cynical attempt to provide political cover for Democrats to allow them to carry on their government shutdown for the long term. Now, I'll point out, we did 13 short-term clean CRs when they had the majority and President Biden was in the White House. 13. They've now voted 13 times against a clean CR. I have no idea where you're coming from. The Democrat leader said that President Trump could end this with a stroke of his pen. And he's right. We passed that bill with a stroke of his pen, he'll sign it into law. And the government opens up. And SNAP beneficiaries, SNAP recipients get food assistance. But you know what else? TSA workers get paid. Air traffic controllers get paid. Border Patrol agents get paid. Troops get paid. These people here get paid who are working without pay. You want to extend that and keep that going? Give me a break. So the people who aren't going to get the benefit of what they're trying to do today, Mr. President, are all the other programs that are affected. Head Start, grants to law enforcement to fight fentanyl and hire more cops to protect communities. Rural development programs that are important in my state, Senator from New Mexico State, I assume as well, that support housing, utilities, infrastructure projects in rural communities. Small business loans, certain direct loan and emergency programs that farmers rely on. National Guard training, critical to our nation's military readiness. Veterans transition assistance as they come out of service. Veterans cemetery services. Right now, there are no headstones, memorial certificates, cemetery maintenance. Programs that are at risk, rental and housing assistance. Delays in processing FHA-insured loans. Delays in aircraft inspections and maintenance for air traffic control equipment. People that are currently not getting paid. I mentioned some of them, but air traffic controllers, TSA officers, Capitol Police, the people who protect us in this building, NOAA employees who are tracking hurricanes and other potential weather disasters, food inspectors, other food and drug safety officials, mine safety inspectors, people who don't have pay certainty right now, troops, Coast Guard, ICE, Border Patrol, federal law enforcement, federal federal wildland fighters, firefighters, extenders that have lapsed, telehealth and at-home care, community health centers, teaching health centers, special diabetes programs, payments for ambulances, hospital at-home services, other lapsed authorizations, CISA to prevent against cyber attacks, National Flood Insurance Program to prevent closure, on homes in flood zones. That's what you're leaving on the table. The bill at the desk takes care of all of it. Funds SNAP, funds WIC, and yes, with the stroke of the president's pen, he can sign it into law and everybody starts getting paid again. This is got to stop. Hostage taking. Now you want some political cover. How long is this going to go on? How much longer do you want to see it go on? Just out of curiosity. So you think this buys some time. You want the shutdown to go on for another month, and then we're going to have another people come down here and, well, let's carve this out or carve this out. Why don't we just open the government? I've never seen anything like this. I've been here a good amount of time. I've seen continuing resolutions and appropriations problems and funding fights and government shutdowns. I've been through a few. I've never seen anything like this. This just isn't done. You want to have a discussion about health care? Absolutely. Let's do it. Open the government, let's do it. President will sit down with Democrats next week if you want to talk about health care. That's not what this is about. So, Mr. President, we're not going to pick winners and losers. It's time to fund everybody that is experiencing the pain from this shutdown. The Democrats really want to fund SNAP and WIC. I have a bill for them, sitting right there at the desk. Clean, nonpartisan, CR to fund SNAP, WIC, and the entire government, and all the many programs and people that the Democrat SNAP bill completely ignores. Mr. President, Democrats have spent a month now, playing with people's livelihoods because the far left wing of their party won't let them accept a clean, nonpartisan CR. If they want to prevent damage from their shutdown, they can end the shutdown. The bill's right here at the desk. So, Mr. President, I ask that the senator from New Mexico modify his request so that the Senate can proceed to the immediate consideration of calendar number 168, H.R. 5371, that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Does the senator so modify his request?
Mr. President,
The senator from New Mexico.
reserving the right to object. Mr. President, I respect the majority leader, the Republican leader. I see some of his staff in the room as well, people that I've worked with. They know when I work with them and when others don't. But I understand the words that were being used today to spin an argument as to why there should be justification for 40 million people to go hungry. You know, Mr. President, I get in trouble sometimes because I use language from that little farm that I still call home. but I've learned the rules of decorum on this Senate floor, so I won't use them today. But some of the lessons my father taught me early in my life, even after I was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives, when he'd leave a shovel by the front door when I'd go home on a weekend, and he'd leave my rubber boots there to make sure I'd put them on, because we're going to go clean the barn. We raise cattle, we raise sheep, we raise all kinds of animals, and after those animals eat, they make something. Some of us use it to fertilize our lands, some people call it manure. I won't refer to it as the language that I usually call it when I'm not on the Senate floor. I also taught it's important to tell people the truth and be honest with the American people. What the good leader left out when he was talking about the number of votes that Republicans voted on under a Democratic president, under a Democratic majority in the Senate and in the House, was that there was not a shutdown. We negotiated. People came to meetings. As a matter of fact, a lot of my Democratic constituents told me Democrats gave way too much to those Republicans when you were in the majority. Well, when you have to negotiate, when you hold power, when you're in the majority, you meet people. You pull them in. You know how, folks, you know where my office is. You all have heard me talk about the late Governor Bruce King, cattle farmer out in New Mexico. He used to tell us when people can't figure out what's going on, you lock them up in a barn and you don't let them out until they figure out how to get along. Well, if we don't got a barn, maybe they've got an office around here to sit some people. And there's a White House. It's easy to get in. There's a big hole in it. Invite some people over there to sit down. President Trump said not long ago that if there's a shutdown, it's up to presidents to bring people together to prevent it. And if there's a shutdown, it does not bode well for the President of the United States of America. He's absolutely right. It's not just a Democratic bill to fund SNAP that's on the floor today. There's a pending bill that has been introduced into the United States Senate that has 11 Republicans that are co-signers, including the Republican who authored it, a colleague out of Missouri. He does not want his folks to go hungry, and he's saying, enough of this nonsense. Let's have a bill on the floor. Give him a UC. If you don't want to give the Democratic bill a unanimous consent, give the Republican-authored bill the unanimous consent. I'm a co-sponsor of that one, too, because I'm willing to work with folks. You all know that. You all know that. Look, days before Americans start receiving notices that health care premiums are about to skyrocket as the Trump administration moves to cut off SNAP benefits, this dysfunction is what the American people have come to expect from Republican majorities in the Congress and the White House. And look, I appreciate my colleagues saying the blame is on our side of the aisle. We're in the majority. Oh, not yet. Maybe soon. We're in the minority. With power comes responsibility. Republicans are in the majority in the Senate. Fact. Republicans are in the majority in the House of Representatives. Fact. Donald Trump, the President of the United States, is a Republican. Fact. Cannot be refuted. They're in charge. The American people know that. So, Mr. President, just as a reminder, SNAP has never not been funded when there have been shutdowns in the past, including President Donald Trump's first term. And even under President Trump's second term, he tapped $1 billion of the $6 billion to pay for staff to administer SNAP. They did it. Now they want to take down policy from a website that says that they can justify doing this, showing the law. That's the nonsense. That's the garbage the American people are tired of, the political this, the political jostling, all of that. We got people that are going to go hungry. This has never happened before, y'all. There's a better way to do this. So, Mr. President, in response to the request from the Majority Leader, the Republican leader, on behalf of constituents from South Dakota, constituents from New Mexico that do not, so that I'm clear, sometimes people confuse my New Mexico accent, that do not want to see their health premiums double and triple and bankrupt them, and some people that can't afford to get insurance won't be as lucky as me, where I survived a stroke 3 years ago. By the way, this is what a stroke survivor looks like. If you get access to a doctor, you don't have to worry about going bankrupt because you can't pay the bills. This is what you can look like. You can get better. And in America, we should strive for that. So again, on behalf of constituents from South Dakota that do not want to see health premiums double and triple, on behalf of my New Mexico constituents that do not want to see health premiums double or triple, I will not modify my request.
The objection to the modification is heard.
Mr. President.
Is there an objection to the original request?
Mr. President,
The Majority Leader.
I regret the fact that the Senator from New Mexico and his Democrat colleagues are unwilling to modify his request to include keeping the government open. And I would say, rhetorical question to my colleague from New Mexico, if the government reopens, do SNAP beneficiaries get paid? Yeah, right? So do WIC beneficiaries. Veterans, low-income elderly people, people who need this assistance. It's not like you're doing anything here that isn't accomplished by reopening the government and paying everybody else. And you guys know that. There are a lot of people today who aren't getting paid. Last Friday, federal employees didn't get paid for the first time. Yesterday, air traffic controllers didn't get paid for the first time. And it only worsens over time. And so I would be more than willing, and have said this multiple times, as you all know, to sit down, get a group together, talk about health care. We think that Obamacare, and particularly the enhanced subsidies, are desperately in need of reform. There's no income cap. There's no asset test. People are making $500,000 to $600,000 a year and getting subsidies from the federal government for their health care. There are $0 premiums. There are millions of Americans who don't even know they have coverage, because the way that program is structured, the payments go directly to the insurance companies. So insurance companies are out there auto-enrolling people and making bank. A lot of people don't even know that they have insurance coverage. So this program is desperately in need of reform. The waste, fraud, and abuse in this program is kind of gotten to an epic level, because if you look at what's happened since 2013 when the exchanges went online, insurance premiums in the individual marketplace on the exchanges have gone up 221%. I mean, you tell me any place else in the economy that goes up 221% in that amount of time. It's going up double digits every year. In the employer market, it'd be 6 to 7%. So it's a program that's fundamentally in need of change and reform. It's unsustainable and it's unaffordable. And to give you an example of that, doing the very thing you're talking about, which is included in your bill, which was offered as an alternative to the Republican proposal, the clean Republican proposal that simply opens the government, the proposal included in your bill is a $400 billion item, cost to the taxpayers. And so we're willing to sit down and see, and I've said on behalf of the President as well, that he's willing to sit down and talk about how we can reform and make health care in this country more affordable and less inflationary. Because this program is inflationary. It's going up every year. Now, you all are going to blame the doing away with the Biden bonus payments in that legislation for the increase. But the fact of the matter is that'll be a very small part of that because of the way the program is structured in the first place. There is no incentive to constrain or control costs. So let's have that conversation. I've said that. We can sit down and do it. But as many of you have said, and there are quotes out there from all of you, in previous shutdowns or when there's fights over a continuing resolution, that you can't negotiate when you have a gun to your head. The Democrat leader said that. And so let's get beyond this silliness and fund the government and make sure that SNAP recipients and WIC recipients and recipients of other government programs, which I mentioned, and it's a long list, which isn't covered by your bill, by the way, that those people and those programs also get taken care of. We have a chance to do that, and we actually have a chance, I think, to have a normal appropriations process where we move bills across the floor, open them up to the amendment process, something that hasn't been done here in a while. We can do that. I want to start now. But it starts when we open up the government. So let's just do what normal people would do. And Senator from New Mexico is right. I represent a lot of hardworking Americans, farmers, ranchers, small business people, school teachers, educators. My dad and mom were educators. And I just think that there are a lot of people out there who look at this and say, this doesn't make any sense to me. If they want to talk about health care, then let's do that. But why take the federal government hostage and every federal employee, including everybody in this room that's not getting paid, that isn't covered by the bill that you're putting forward? The bill that does cover everybody is the one right there, which we've now voted on 13 times. Just a few. A few of you decide to vote differently. Let's get on appropriations bills, start funding the government the old-fashioned way. I'm for that. I think everybody over here is up for that. I know the chair of our Appropriations Committee, Susan Collins, and most of the appropriators on the committee have worked together in a constructive way, in a bipartisan way, to get bills to the floor that we can consider. But so far, everything we've tried to do here, at least in the last few weeks, have been blocked, including get on the defense appropriations bill and go into conference on 3 bills we've already passed. So, Mr. President, as much as I appreciate what the senator from New Mexico is trying to do here, and he's not, I don't question his intentions, I think he is sincere, but I also think that this is missing the larger point here, and that is this government is closed. And what you're trying to do and accomplish here is make it harder, not easier, to get the government opened up again and to make sure everybody else gets paid. So, Mr. President, I object.
Objection is heard.
Ask unanimous consent the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
And I move to proceed to calendar number 168, H.R. 5371.
Clerk will report.
Motion to proceed to calendar 168, H.R. 5371, an act making continuing appropriations and extensions for fiscal year 2026 and for other purposes.
Mr. President, Democrats are grasping at straws these days. The other day, the Democrat leader came to the floor and tried to reboot the notion that the clean CR sitting before us here in the Senate is a partisan CR. Yep. Apparently a bill with no partisan add-ons, strictly a bill to fund the government, is a partisan bill. Only in Democrat land, Mr. President. Democrat leader, of course, continues to try to push this ludicrous narrative that Republicans or President Trump shut down the government. That's right. The party that demanded nothing and put forward a clean, nonpartisan bill is the party that shut down the government. And the party that demanded $1.5 trillion to keep the government open until Friday, until Halloween. That's what their bill will do. $1.5 trillion in new spending to keep the federal government open until Friday. I wonder if Democrats have seen some of the recent headlines, like this one. And I quote, benefits cliff amps up pressure on Senate Democrats, end quote, and, quote, largest federal workers union calls for an end to the shutdown, putting pressure on Democrats, end quote. Putting pressure on Democrats, Mr. President, not Republicans. Now, why? Because Republicans are ready to reopen the government today, and we're not demanding a single thing in exchange. It's the Democrats who are refusing. In fact, the Democrats' latest ploy is, get this, moral outrage that the president isn't stepping in to save Democrats from the consequences of their actions. That's right. Democrats are outraged that they are coming face to face with the consequences of their decision to shut down the government. And so they're flailing around, blaming President Trump for not stepping in to somehow save the SNAP program from running out of money to pay benefits. Yeah, that's right, Mr. President. The very same people who were content to let the Special Supplemental Nutrition Program for Women, Infants, and Children, more commonly known as WIC, run dry are now positioning themselves as crusaders for nutrition benefits. President Trump did step in to save Democrats from themselves on WIC. He somehow managed to find money to cover the program for the time being. But there is a limit to what he can do. That's kind of the reason we like to, have the government open. But apparently Democrats are still not willing to contemplate allowing the government to function, because the SNAP bill that they tried to use yesterday was not just a cynical political ploy to insulate themselves from the consequences of their own actions. It was also a disturbing signal. The Democrats are ready to continue this shutdown, I guess forever. Do Democrats have any end date in sight? Are there any consequences bad enough to get Democrats to reopen the government again? Because things are getting pretty serious here, Mr. President. The shutdown had consequences from day one. But now, 30 days in, the consequences are really stonewalling. Here are some headlines, I think, that describe the situation. Government shutdown could lead to $14 billion in lost GDP, the Congressional Budget Office reports. Shutdown could close Head Start programs this week, jeopardizing child care. Shutdown crushes small business owners as losses hit billions. Industry leaders beg Congress for clean CR. Ongoing government shutdown threatens holiday travel. National Guard training grinds to halt amid shutdown with no pay in sight. U.S. government shutdown, 60,000 aviation safety staff face financial strain as crisis deepens. Largest federal workers union calls for clean bill to end shutdown. Those, Mr. President, are just a sampling of the headlines out there, and they represent the consequences as the Democrat shutdown accelerates. So when will the Democrats put an end to this, Mr. President? When the economy is in ruins? When federal workers have lost their homes? When housing assistance and small business loans and Head Start and National Guard training are distant memories? I hope the pain of the American people is worth the plaudits the Democrats are getting from their liberal base. Mr. President, I don't know if listing out the consequences of Democrat shutdown moves any Democrats anymore. I really don't. In fact, more than one member of their party, way more than one member of their party, has described using the pain of the American people as leverage. I'll give you an example of some of the things that they've been saying. Starting with the Democrat leader, every day gets better for us. The whip, the number 2 position among House Democrats, says there will be families that are going to suffer, but it was one of the few times, or the few leverage times that we have. Senator from New Mexico, paying our troops gives the president more leverage. That's a really good reason not to pay the troops, right? Senator from Arizona, asked about it, said, hey, I just go back and shut it down again. Senator from Delaware, frankly, this is our only moment of leverage, and although a very pleasant tool to use, very unpleasant tool to use. Yeah, it's unpleasant, all right, if you're a worker who's lost their jobs, not getting paid. And of course, the senator from Vermont, you reopen the government, we lose our leverage. It's all about leverage. That's what they're making it all about, leverage. So the question is, when are American people going to matter more than their leverage, Mr. President? If there are any Democrats out there who can still see beyond the demands of their far-left base, if there are any Democrats who care about the damage that this shutdown is doing, then I have a bill right there at the desk. A clean, nonpartisan continuing resolution to fund WIC, SNAP, troop pay, air traffic controller pay, farm programs, housing assistance, our national defense, and every single other government priority. We just need 5 Democrats to show some courage and join the 3 Democrats who are already with us, and we can get this government open. That's all it takes, Mr. President. Everybody knows that in the Senate it takes 60 votes to do anything. And Democrats come down here and consistently say, well, the Republicans have control of the Senate, the House, the White House. And the Republicans in the House, the Senate, and the White House are all agreed. Open up the government. But you can't do that in the Senate unless you have 60 votes, meaning we have to have a few Democrats. We have a few already. We need 5 Democrats with a backbone. 5 Democrats with the courage to take on that far-left base and say we care more about the lives of the American people than about gaining some political leverage. This takes 5, Mr. President. Enough is enough. I urge my Democrat colleagues to agree to reopen the federal government and to do it today. Mr. President, I yield the floor. And I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Ms. Alsobrooks.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I move to proceed to calendar number 168, H.R. 5371.
The clerk will report.
Motion to proceed to calendar number 168, H.R. 5371, an act making continuing appropriations and extensions for fiscal year 2026 and for other purposes.
Mr. President, it's November. November. It's been 5 weeks since Democrats shut down the government. And once again, we start this week by asking, is this the week that Democrats end their shutdown? Mr. President, I've said it before that there are no winners in a government shutdown. There are no winners, but there are plenty of losers. Chief among them is the American people. As the senior Democrat from Virginia said just last year, and I quote, "Shutdowns aren't victimless crimes," end quote. And after 5 weeks, Mr. President, the victims of the Democrat shutdown are starting to pile up. Military families have turned to food banks in significant numbers. And they're not the only ones. Food banks in this area and around the country have seen an influx of federal workers who are missing paychecks due to the shutdown. And things are set to get much worse with SNAP running on limited emergency funds and its future uncertain. Thanks to Democrats, millions more Americans, millions, Mr. President, are now at risk of going hungry. And yet the Democrat shutdown marches on. And of course, letting Americans go hungry is just the beginning. Thanks to Democrats, Head Start programs are beginning to close. Housing assistance programs are at risk. Seniors and people in rural areas can't access telehealth services. National Guard training is on hold. Veterans programs are on pause. I'm sorry to say I could go on. Actually, I could go on for a while. Shutdowns have consequences, and the pain is being felt around the country. Mr. President, last week it seemed that Democrats were beginning to acknowledge that their shutdown is having consequences. We even heard Democrats express concern that Americans were suffering. But when they were given the chance to end all of that suffering, the vast majority of Democrats in this body were perfectly willing to prolong the shutdown and the American people's pain. The vast majority of Democrats voted once again against a clean continuing resolution, the only bill on offer that could end all this suffering literally in a matter of hours. It is the only bill in the Senate that would fix every single issue I just mentioned. It would pay our troops, fund SNAP, Head Start, veterans programs, pay our staffers. 3 Democrat senators already support that clean continuing resolution, Mr. President. And the Democrat from Maine who supported the clean CR in the House said, and I quote, "There's a lot of important work to be done in Congress, none of which will be any easier if Mainers are suffering the harms of a government shutdown." End quote. The Teamsters Union and the American Federation of Government Employees, more traditionally allies of Democrats, to be frank, have called for Congress to spare the American people further pain and to pass the clean continuing resolution. And they're far from the only ones. Mr. President, it should not be this hard for a handful of Democrats to support a clean bill that simply reopens the government. It's a very straightforward proposition. It's a 24-page bill sitting right here at the Senate desk. Not a single new Republican policy, no partisan policy writers, nothing that Democrats haven't supported before on numerous occasions. It just reopens the government. And it's just 5 Democrat votes away from being sent to the President, who would sign it literally in a matter of hours. This bill is also the quickest way to get the two discussions, I should say, about health care. That is, if Democrats are serious about solving the Obamacare problem and not just interested in using it as a political issue. As I've said more times than I can count, Republicans are more than willing to have a health care discussion with Democrats. In fact, had Democrats voted to reopen the government last week, President Trump would be meeting with them this week. Unlike Democrats who want to continue papering over the unaffordability of Obamacare forevermore, Republicans have ideas for actually lowering health care costs. And lowering costs not just for Americans on Obamacare, but also for seniors, vulnerable Americans, and the majority of Americans who get their health care through their employers. And so we're ready and willing to have that discussion. But first, Democrats need to stop playing politics with people's lives and reopen the government. Mr. President, airline travel is snarled. Small businesses are suffering. Hundreds of thousands of Americans are working without pay. And now, 40 million Americans in need are at risk of losing their food stamps. So the question, Mr. President, is how long How long are Democrats going to continue this? Another month? 2? 3? How much suffering is enough for Democrats? Mr. President, the bill's sitting right there. We voted on it 14 times already. We'll get that opportunity to vote on it a 15th time tomorrow. And for the sake of the American people, let's hope that at least some Democrats can see their way to ending this and ending it soon. Mr. President, I yield the floor. I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsop.
An act making continuing appropriations and extensions for fiscal year 2026 and for other purposes.
Mr. President, like many Americans, I was saddened to learn this morning of the death of former Vice President Dick Cheney. Dick was a lifelong public servant who believed very deeply in our country and brought his considerable knowledge and intelligence to its service. As Secretary of Defense and later as Vice President, he played a key role in shaping policy on many of the most consequential issues of his day. He was also an avid outdoorsman and fly fisherman who loved spending time in the mountains of his home state. I enjoyed having him in South Dakota and showing off some of what our state has to offer. Mr. President, my thoughts and prayers today are with his wife Lynn, with his 2 beloved daughters, and with his 7 grandchildren. Mr. President, quote, "Every day gets better for us," end quote. Those were the words of the Democrat leader a week into this shutdown, reflecting on the supposed benefits, political benefits for Senate Democrats. Mr. President, I guess it's nice that every day is getting better for Senate Democrats, because it sure isn't getting better for anyone else. We're in the 6th week of the Democrat shutdown, Mr. President. That's right, the 6th week. And Democrats' victims are everywhere. Let's just go through a few headlines. These are some headlines from newspapers and news outlets around the country. Some Head Start preschools shudder as government shutdown continues. Shutdown crushes small business owners as losses hits billions. Industry leaders beg Congress for a clean CR. Everyone is worried. Dallas SNAP recipients navigate uncertainty and dwindling funds. That's a Democrat shutdown at work, Mr. President. Here's another headline. After a month of the shutdown, workers face mounting bills, car repossessions. And the subhead to that article said this: finances are becoming dire for the more than 750,000 government workers who've been going without pay now for a full month. Here's some more headlines, Mr. President. Flight delays pile up as government shutdown enters 2nd month. Worst weekend for air traffic controller staffing since the start of the shutdown. Flight delays could worsen as government shutdown drags on. Could worsen, Mr. President. And we're entering one of the busiest travel seasons of the year with people making holiday plans with their families. Mr. President, there are a lot more headlines where those came from. People are suffering, all because Democrats can't bring themselves to accept a clean, nonpartisan funding bill. Mr. President, the list of people begging Democrats to pass a clean government funding extension is long, and it's growing longer. The Teamsters Union, the New York City Steam Fitters Union, the American Federation of Government Employees, multiple airline pilot unions, the National Air Traffic Controllers Association, business organizations like the National Restaurant Association. And Mr. President, I could go on. All of these organizations are begging Democrats to take yes for an answer and support a clean, nonpartisan bill. the one sitting right there at the desk that is available to be picked up and passed today, sent to the President, signed into law, and the government opens. The Democrats are recalcitrant. Mr. President, for a party that claims to represent working people, it is striking to me how very little Democrats seem to care about working people during this shutdown. The senior Democrat from Vermont published an op-ed this weekend in which he calls for this shutdown to keep going forever, as far as I can tell. Of course, he attempts to claim that Democrats are doing this for working people. To which I say, Mr. President, give me a break. Democrats are injuring working people with their shutdown. Maybe Democrats have no idea what it's like to live paycheck to paycheck like so many Americans, including many government employees. But let me just tell them there are a whole lot of working people out there who can't afford to miss a single paycheck, much less the multiple paychecks that they've now missed thanks to the Senate Democrats. And beyond the people Democrats have directly deprived of paychecks, there are a lot of other people whose livelihood is being affected by this shutdown, like small business owners and employees whose income has declined because the federal workers who usually patronize their businesses are out of work. There's really nothing Democrats can do to make that right. But they can at least make sure that they don't extend the pain that people are experiencing. Later today, we're going to vote once again on a clean, nonpartisan funding extension, the one we voted on 14 times already, the one sitting right at the desk, Mr. President, that would open up this government today and make sure that all of those Americans will get paid. We just need 5 Democrats to join the 3 who are already voting with us, and we could end all this pain and reopen the government. That's all it takes, Mr. President. 5 Democrats. Everybody knows, follows our government in this process, that in the Senate, it takes a supermajority. It takes 60 votes to do virtually anything. So we need help. We need help from some Democrats with a backbone who are courageous enough to take on their left-wing base and do the right thing for the American people. And I do realize, Mr. President, that Democrats are facing tremendous pressure from the far left wing of their party, which is apparently content to see working people suffer as long as Democrats make a good show of opposing President Trump. But I hope that there are at least those 5 Democrats out there who will look at the pain that people are experiencing and will say, enough is enough. We're in the 6th week now, Mr. President, of this shutdown. The 6th week. While every day may be getting better for Senate Democrats, thanks to Senate Democrats, every day is getting worse for the American people. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsobrooks.
Mr. President, can this be over now? Have the American people suffered enough? Or do Democrats need more? Democrats have snarled air traffic, they've damaged small businesses, they've left federal workers in line at food banks, they've jeopardized food assistance. Food assistance, Mr. President, for 40 million Americans. Are they satisfied now? Or does the far left want more? Surely Democrats have hit enough milestones. The election is over. Democrats now have the extremely dubious honor of being responsible for the longest government shutdown in American history. So the question is, Mr. President, can the American people get a break now? Democrats should be embarrassed. Embarrassed that federal workers are lining up at food banks and missing bills and in danger of losing homes or cars because Democrats can't summon enough members to support a clean, nonpartisan funding resolution. That's right, Mr. President, a clean, nonpartisan funding bill sitting right here at the Senate desk. We've not asked Democrats to support a single new Republican policy. We haven't asked them to support a single partisan policy rider. We simply asked them to extend current funding levels for a few weeks so that we could have time to do bipartisan work on appropriations bills. But Democrats couldn't take yes for an answer. And on the subject of appropriations, Mr. President, if any Democrats cherish the faintest hope of still funding the government through a full-year appropriations process, a process that they've displayed, or I should say delayed, for 5 weeks and counting, they should vote for the clean, nonpartisan CR today. Mr. President, I realize that Democrats have been under a lot of pressure from their far-left base to keep the shutdown going. And I assume that it was pressure from Democrats' far-left base that saw the Democrat leader flip his position on shutdowns 180 degrees in the space of just 6 months. And I realize that there are a number of Democrats in the Senate who are not just yielding to pressure from the far left, but are themselves members of the far left and are happy to continue the shutdown forever, if it means somehow sticking it, they think, to President Trump. But I'm hoping there are still Democrats out there who can see beyond the political extremism of their leftist base. And I hope there are some Democrats who can take an honest look at the widespread damage that their shutdown is doing and say enough is enough. Thanksgiving is rapidly approaching. Parents are starting to think about what they're going to put under the tree. Do Democrats still want federal employees lining up at food banks at Thanksgiving? At Christmas? And on the topic of the holidays, it's an open question whether people will be able to spend it with their families this year if the shutdown continues. Air traffic has been snarled for weeks as a result of Democrat shutdown, and things are getting worse. The Transportation Secretary just announced yesterday that the government may be forced to close parts of our airspace if the shutdown continues into next week. Close airspace, Mr. President. Think about that. And I could go on. I could talk about the unions asking Democrats to end this shutdown and support a clean continuing resolution. I could talk about the business organizations making the same request. I could read the headlines about Head Start preschools closing and SNAP recipients who are worried about their benefits and National Guard units who aren't training, and on and on. Every single thing as a result of Democrats' decision to shut down the government more than 5 weeks ago. But surely, Mr. President, surely, there are at least some Democrat senators who can see this for themselves. See this for themselves and realize it is past time to end this before the damage gets even worse. Mr. President, it's day 36 of Democrats' shutdown. Day 36. How much longer are Democrats going to make the American people suffer? Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Republican leader?
Senate and quorum call.
Yes.
I would ask unanimous consent the quorum call be lifted.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I move to proceed to calendar number 168, H.R. 5371.
Clerk will report.
Motion to proceed to calendar 168, H.R. 5371, an act making continuing appropriations and extensions for fiscal year 2026 and for other purposes.
Mr. President, we are 37 days into an entirely avoidable government shutdown. And I say avoidable, Mr. President, because it was. Democrats instigated this shutdown by rejecting a clean, nonpartisan funding resolution. Republicans weren't asking them to swallow a bunch of new conservative policies. There isn't a single partisan policy in the bill. And yet Democrats couldn't bring themselves to take yes for an answer. Democrats, of course, have claimed their decision to shut down the government's about health care. They want Republicans to bail out their Obamacare mess. And as I've said probably 1,000 times now, Mr. President, Republicans are 100% willing to sit down and talk about the mess that Democrats have created. We're just not going to have that conversation while Democrats are holding the federal government hostage. That was our position in September. That was our position in October. And yes, it's still our position in November. We're just waiting for Democrats to take yes for an answer. Mr. President, I do know that Democrats have been under a lot of pressure from the far left. The far left pushed them to shut down the government. And the far left has pushed them to keep it shut down. As one House Democrat told Axios yesterday, and I quote, "There would be hell to pay if Senate Democrats don't let events play out," end quote. There would be hell to pay if Senate Democrats don't let events play out. That quote from a House Democrat just yesterday. Well, Mr. President, what events need to play out? What more needs to happen for the far left to be satisfied? The pain this shutdown has caused is only getting worse. 40 million Americans who rely on food assistance programs are now at risk of going hungry without a resolution to the shutdown. I'm sure these Americans are doing everything in their power to feed their families, but they can't do that forever. Federal workers have now gone without pay for more than a month, including the people in this building. Will the far left not be satisfied until federal workers and military families are getting their Thanksgiving dinner from a food bank? Because that's where we're headed. And then, Mr. President, there's air travel. Yesterday, the Transportation Secretary announced that as a matter of safety, the Department of Transportation is requiring mandatory reduction in air traffic starting tomorrow because of shutdown staffing issues. That means widespread flight cancellations, supply chain issues, hundreds of thousands of passengers dealing with disruptions to travel every day. The impact this will have will be immense. And all of it because Democrats cannot bring themselves to accept a clean, nonpartisan funding resolution, something that happened 13 times when they had the majority and President Biden was in the White House. So I ask the question again, Mr. President, what more do Democrats need? They got their chairs at the left-wing No Kings rally. They kept their base satisfied through the fall campaigns and Election Day. And as of Tuesday, they have the extremely dubious honor of instigating the longest and most severe government shutdown in history. How much more do Americans have to endure before Democrats are satisfied? Mr. President, the Democrat leader said yesterday that every day gets better for Democrats. The number 2 Democrat in the House has said that the American people's suffering takes a back seat to Democrats' precious leverage. And the senior senator from Vermont, a leading voice on the left, wrote an op-ed over the weekend calling for Democrats to keep the government shut down forever, as far as I can tell. Mr. President, I hope that's not where most Democrats are. I hope at least a few Democrats can see that this can't go on any longer. People are suffering, and it's getting worse every day. A furloughed federal employee, a mother of 5 in Maryland, told the New York Times last week, and I quote, "I don't know how to get the mortgage paid," end quote. Federal workers are taking on second jobs to make ends meet. Food banks across the country are overwhelmed. And American families are looking to the holiday season with apprehension. Mr. President, Democrats have a choice to make. Are they going to continue to bow to pressure from voices on the far left telling them to keep up their opposition? Or are they going to stop the American people's suffering and end this shutdown? I hope enough of them are willing to do the right thing. And I hope they do it soon. The American people can't wait for events to play out. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsterbrooks.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
Well, Mr. President, the junior senator from Connecticut certainly believes in saying the quiet part out loud. This is what he said, and I quote, "I think there will be some pretty substantial damage done to a Democrat brand that has been rehabilitated if on the heels of an election in which the people told us to keep fighting, we immediately stop fighting." He said that on a podcast yesterday. He went on to say that the 2026 election is just 12 months away. And if we surrender without having gotten anything, and we cause a lot of folks in this country who had started to believe in the Democrat Party to retreat again, I worry that it will be hard to sort of get them back up off the mat in time for next fall's election cycle, end quote. Let me repeat that, Mr. President. This is what he said. I worry that it will be hard to sort of get them back up off the mat in time for next fall's election cycle, end quote. Gotta let that sink in for a minute, Mr. President. I don't think it's a secret to anybody that the Democrats shut down the government for political reasons. There's been plenty of news coverage of the incredible pressure that their far-left base has been exerting. But in case anyone was still under the impression that Democrats were driving this shutdown toward its 40th day out of concern for the American people, well, the junior Democrat from Connecticut pretty handily dispelled that notion. Again, that's what he said. I worry that it will be hard to sort of get them back off the mat in time for next fall's election cycle, end quote. And just in case anyone needed any additional testimony, Axios reported on Wednesday, and I quote, "A set of post-election talking points circulated among Democratic congressional offices warned caving without concessions would sap Democrats' momentum and undercut the party's support from its base. Democrats throwing Republicans a rope in exchange for nothing would be political self-sabotage," it added. Political self-sabotage, Mr. President. Now, there are two very striking things about these quotes. One, of course, is the focus not on the American people, but on how to ensure Democrats win the next election. And two is the fact that progressive Democrats apparently want to keep this shutdown going forever. We're on day 38 of Democrat shutdown. Day 38. Federal workers have gone more than a month now without pay. They don't know how they're going to pay their mortgage or buy food, thanks to Democrats. A lot of them are supposed to get another paycheck today. Instead, they'll see a deposit of exactly $0 in their bank account. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Head Start preschools have closed. Veterans programs have shuttered. Many Medicare recipients can't get access to telehealth. National Guard troops aren't training. SNAP benefits are in profound jeopardy. There are people going hungry right now because Democrats refuse to agree to a clean, nonpartisan funding extension. And of course, then there's air travel. Because of staffing shortages caused by Democrat shutdown, the Department of Transportation had to issue a mandatory reduction in air travel beginning today. Hundreds of thousands of people will be affected every day, to say nothing of disruptions to the movement of packages and goods. But nothing seems to move Democrats. Nothing. Not hungry Americans, not massive disruptions to our economy. Nothing. Mr. President, if I were a Democrat, I would be embarrassed. I mean, flat out embarrassed to walk into this building every day, to walk past the men and women of the Capitol Police who are not getting paid thanks to Democrats, to walk past junior staffers, many of whom are undoubtedly frantic by this point as they wonder how they're going to pay their rent and continue to buy food. How can Democrats look any of these people in the eyes? And please don't tell me they're fighting for some greater good for the American people. If Democrats can be said to be fighting for anyone at all besides themselves, they are fighting for a fraction of a fraction, for a tiny percentage of the small percentage of Americans who are on Obamacare. The number of people they're supposedly fighting for is dwarfed, and I say dwarfed, Mr. President, by the number of people whose lives and livelihoods they are damaging. And as for the claim that Democrats got some kind of mandate from the American people on Tuesday to continue jeopardizing food stamps for 40 million Americans in need, give me a break. Democrats performed well in 3 states where Democrats often perform well. Congratulations. I really don't think that means that the American people have all signed up to be democratic socialists. And it sure as heck doesn't provide a good reason for making 40 million Americans go hungry. Mr. President, I would like to think that the junior senator from Connecticut doesn't represent all Senate Democrats. But if there are Senate Democrats out there who do still care about hardworking Americans and not just Democrats' election prospects, the time to act is now. Not when the far left decides this exercise can be over. Not when federal workers are lining up at food banks for their Thanksgiving meal. Now. Today. I hope, Mr. President, there are at least 5 more Democrats out there with a backbone who will vote with us to reopen the government and end these weeks of misery for the American people. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Zosser-Brooks.
Madam President,
Senator from Wisconsin.
I ask that the quorum call be initiated.
Without objection.
So, Madam President, 2 weeks ago I came to the floor in support of a bill that we were going to vote on, a motion to proceed, called the Shutdown Fairness Act. Pretty simple bill. The name pretty well describes exactly what it is. It's trying to be fair during these dysfunctional shutdowns, that any of the federal workers who are forced to work because they're in our military, they're in federal law enforcement, they're TSA or they're air traffic controllers, that they're keeping this nation and Americans safe. If we're going to force them to work, at a minimum, let's make sure we pay them and pay them on time. Now, I came down in as nonpartisan manner as I possibly could and literally begged the other side, just join us. Vote to proceed to the bill. That they had some objections to it, things that I was willing to address. For example, my bill only addressed workers that were forced to work. They wanted to include furloughed workers. I said on the floor, listen, I'm happy to add that as an amendment. I think, working with my conference, I can get the conference to support it as well. It wasn't quite that easy, but in the end, we overcame objections within our conference to adding furloughed workers. So we've completely amended the bill now. We've added furloughed workers. In the meantime, surprising to me, we had federal employee worker unions reach out to us, asking what they could do to help pass this bill. They are sick and tired of being used as pawns in this political dysfunction here. They're tired of it. One of the things that definitely appealed to them once I added furloughed workers was my bill makes it permanent. My bill says we will never use you again as a pawn in the political gamesmanship that's being played out right now. So I'm happy to report the Shutdown Fairness Act, as I've now amended it, adding furloughed workers, is supported by the American Federation of Government Employees, the Federal Managers Association, Federal Law Enforcement Officers Association, National Air Traffic Controllers Association. We tragically had a plane go down early in the week. I'm not saying it's because of air traffic control, but we understand the danger. We have to understand the risks we are taking in not paying air traffic controllers so we can fully man our air towers and keep our airspace safe. The International Association of Firefighters supports my bill. The Association of Flight Attendants does. So again, one of the main reasons they support my bills, in addition to the fact that we added furloughed workers, is my bill makes this permanent. So, Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of calendar number 191, Senate Bill 3012. I further ask that the Johnson substitute amendment at the desk be considered and agreed to the bill as amended, be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Madam President.
Senator from Michigan.
Madam President, reserving the right to object, I just want to first start off and say that I just deeply appreciate that Senator Johnson has updated his proposal to pay all federal employees during the shutdown to include furloughed workers as well as DC employees. So I appreciate all those efforts. I've worked on a number of bills with the senator from Wisconsin. We'd like to continue to work on this bill as well as we go forward. But unfortunately, I just still have some concerns about the way that the bill has been drafted so far. Those are things that I think we can work out and want to work out. We've been going back and forth with our staff. I'm concerned that Senator Johnson's bill still leaves too much discretion up to President Trump. There's too much wiggle room for the administration to basically pick and choose which federal employees are paid and when. And I'm also deeply concerned that this would allow the administration to actually transfer this money to other purposes that are unintended by Congress, which unfortunately we have seen happen repeatedly in this administration. So I believe there are ways that we can put in guardrails. There's a way we can get to that, but we're just not there yet. And I would certainly ask the indulgence of my colleague from Wisconsin to look. We've sent another proposal over to his staff. We can work on this quickly and try to figure out how we get there. But in the meantime, I've also introduced a bill that would pay federal employees just for this shutdown, without the additional powers to the administration. It's just basically a clean bill. No additional language, no complications, no wondering what does this actually mean. It's very straightforward. My Military and Federal Employees Protection Act would ensure that all federal employees receive the pay that they certainly deserve, allowing them to pay their bills on time this month. I've asked Senator Johnson to support my very simple proposal, which I think accomplishes most everything he wants to do, with the exceptions of things about giving the administration more power. I think we can agree on that, whether we can pay our troops and our federal employees, period. That would be my goal. So I will continue to work to this end, to work to end this government shutdown and address the health care crisis. But in the meantime, we must protect our hardworking federal employees. My bill is very straightforward. We could agree to that right now, and it's done. Federal employees are going to get paid without all the other extraneous language that's in the senator's bill. Therefore, I ask that the senator modify his request so that instead the Appropriations Committee be discharged from further consideration S3043, and that the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration, that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered, made, and laid upon the table.
Does the senator from Wisconsin so modify your request, his request?
Reserving the right to object, Madam President. It's important the American public understands what's going on here. Again, I came down here 2 weeks ago. I modified my bill quite dramatically. Entered into talks immediately with the senator from Delaware and the senator from Michigan. Within those talks, again, 2 weeks ago, they were accusing my bill of giving the president all this additional authority. In discussions staff to staff, they admitted there is no additional authority I'm giving to the president in this bill whatsoever. This bill is completely silent on president's authority in terms of who he can furlough. As a matter of fact, everybody's included. Every employee is now included. There's no discretion whatsoever in terms of who's furloughed, who gets brought back to work, who gets paid. They all get paid. The senator from Michigan is well aware of this. Those discussions, I'd say, petered out. Within a few days, I don't know, they were emboldened, they're just digging their heels in, they're going to continue this shutdown. Don't feel that they're getting blamed for it, didn't have much pressure on it. Now, here 2 weeks later, they want to redline the bill. Well, in that 2 weeks, we've had our bill examined exhaustively by our leadership, by OMB, by the unions. Our bill is in a really good place right now. We've tried to think of everything. No federal employee would be excluded from this. The senator from Michigan says my bill allows the president to pick and choose. That's total hogwash. Again, every federal employee, including contractors, gets paid. There's no picking and choosing. That is completely false. Money transfers, what is he talking about? More power? There's no power. It is completely silent in terms of presidential authority. These are false arguments. This is further evidence of the gamesmanship the Democrats are playing with people's lives. They are the party of big government. They've, in effect, taken a family member hostage. I see our leader on the floor here. He's been doing everything he possibly can to help Democrats release their own hostage. Open up the government. Once you do that, we're more than happy to talk to you about how to repair the damage done by Obamacare and transition to a system that works. But they're playing politics. They're using federal employees, and quite honestly, the American public now, whose flights are being delayed, whose skies are less safe. They're using public employees and the American public as pawns in this grotesque display of partisanship. My bill is very simple. It's backed by the public sector unions who generally don't support things I'm putting forward. And if the senator insists on objecting to this, preventing these people, these workers, these people who keep us safe from getting paid in this round, my guess is we'll take a vote on this to proceed to the bill. The problem with that is it's going to take much more time. If we could pass this by unanimous consent right now, we can send it over the House. The Speaker's already indicated if we pass the Shutdown Fairness Act, he'll bring his people back. They're on a 48-hour call. We could have this passed by Monday. Our skies would be safer again. Federal employees would be treated fairly. They would be paid. And they will never, ever be used as pawns in this kind of partisan, this grotesque partisan gamesmanship. So, Madam President, I will not modify my request.
Wisconsin yield for
Absolutely.
Madam President, I'm trying to understand what's going on here, and perhaps the senator from Michigan can clarify. So every public sector employees union is supporting the senator from Wisconsin's bill, but you're objecting because you think it grants too much power to the president. Now, if that's, I don't know how every public sector employees union would be in support of this bill. And my understanding is the modification proposed by the senator from Michigan would essentially cover back pay, but wouldn't do anything to address going forward. So in other words, we're going to keep federal employees hostage. So they might get paid for back pay, but starting tomorrow, they're not going to get paid again. And that means that in the future, they continue to be pawns. They continue to get held hostage. This is a straightforward approach that addresses that issue. And that everybody in this chamber who isn't getting paid, I can't believe people come down here and look these people in the eye when he's saying right here, we will pay them not only for today, but for tomorrow and for the entire year, and we won't allow them to be held hostage and be pawns in a political game in the future. And my understanding is the senator from Michigan, on behalf, I suppose, of other Democrats, is objecting to that. Please, please help me understand. This is a straightforward proposal which addresses the concern that millions of Americans have who are headed to food banks and can't pay their rent. And you're coming down here and saying you're going to object because you just want to pay them for yesterday, not for tomorrow or the next day after that. It's about leverage, isn't it? Isn't that what you all been saying? It's about leverage? This isn't leverage. This is the lives of the American people. Senator of Wisconsin has put forward a straightforward proposal to pay people, federal employees, today, tomorrow, and in the future. And what you're essentially saying is, well, I'm fine with paying them for yesterday, but we're not going to pay them for tomorrow or for the day after that, for the future. And we don't seem to care that there are men and women in uniform who are frequenting food banks, who are not making rent payments, or trying to borrow to get by because it's leverage. So, Mr. President, Madam President, I should say, I would hope, we're going to vote on this, so Senator from Michigan can object to the unanimous consent request the Senator from Wisconsin made. But everybody in this chamber is going to be put on the record on whether or not they want to pay federal employees. Not yesterday, but today and tomorrow and into the future. I am tired of the political games. I really am. And so feel free to object to something that I don't know how anybody in their right mind can walk into this chamber, look these people in the eye, and say, we're not going to pay you. So we're going to vote on it. You object to it right now, but everybody in this chamber is going to vote on whether or not they want to pay federal employees, something that every single public employees union has said they support. I yield back to the Senator from Wisconsin.
Reclaiming my time for briefly to reemphasize the fact, if we can pass this now, and again, Senator from Michigan, I'm literally begging you, do not object. Do not object. It's still going to take a couple days to actually pass this. If we have to go the route of motion to proceed, getting on a bill, I mean, that's going to take quite some time. Our skies can't remain at this level right now. We can't continue these airport delays. We can't continue to use public sector employees and the American public in general as pawns in this partisan gamesmanship. So literally, I think you know me. You know I'm saying this in good faith. Please do not object. Let this bill pass so the House can come back and sign this into law, and these good people who are forced into work or who have been furloughed can get the pay they deserve. Again, today, tomorrow, and in the future, assured they will never, ever be used like pawns in these partisanship games. But again, I'll underscore, I will not modify my request.
Madam President.
Objection is heard to the modification.
I have
Senator,
not objected yet.
is there an objection to the original request?
Thank you, Madam President. Senator from Wisconsin, I know your intent. You and I have worked on a lot of issues. That's not in question here. We do have problems with some of the language in this bill just to make sure that we have guardrails. I want to pay federal employees. That's why I have the bill that's on the floor right now that I'm trying to move. It will pay federal employees. It'll pay contractors as well. You're not doing that, I understand. Everybody who is being shorted right now should be paid, and that's what my legislation does. So we could do that. You know, I'm happy if you want to take my legislation and put your name on it, I'll support it, and we'll pass it right now and send it there, and people are going to get paid. So if you really want to do that, we could do that today. Would you want me to just to put your name on this bill and then we'll pass it? That would be fine to do that. But folks are, excuse me, I haven't reclaimed. So we can make that happen. And if you put it on the floor later, we'll go through the process. I would hope that you and I, during that process, could work on language to perhaps address some of the concerns that I have. It's not that we pay people. That's not my concern. I wouldn't be offering this legislation here today if I was concerned about that. I want them paid. Labor unions support my bill too. No surprise. They're getting paid. And that's why I've introduced it. This is not a political game. I hope we get the shutdown opened. I hope we're able to find common ground to say that we want to lower the cost of Americans of affordable health care, that we don't want to see their premiums go up and people lose insurance. I hope we can do that. It's not a game. I don't see this as leverage. Now, a president who refuses to release SNAP funds to feed people, now that is what is irresponsible and irreprehensible leverage. Money's available to feed people right now, and this president is saying no. The court has ordered him to put that money into food, and he says, I'm going to appeal it. That is absolutely despicable that the president of the United States wants to starve children in order to get his way. We got to move beyond that. We got to find common ground. I hope we can find common ground in this bill. My bill is just plain, simple, clean, no games, no other language. We know we have to have guardrails when we have a lawless president. We better put some guardrails in. He walks over Congress all the time. My colleagues on the Republican side, just let him walk over Congress all the time. I don't know why you ran for office if you just want to be run over by a president. We're a co-equal branch of government. We're here to represent the people of our states. So let's work together, be thoughtful about this, understand that if Congress puts this law forward, it actually goes the way we want, and we don't have a president that basically thumbs their nose that members of the Senate and the House and do what he wants, and he knows the Republicans will say, oh, well, that's fine. We're just here to rubber stamp. That's what we're here for. So let's hope we can work together to get this right, pay employees. They should be. They have a right to that. And I think we can do this if we can get together and get beyond the rhetoric and games we're here and the leader that I heard. It's also on this side as well. So let's work together. Let's open up this government. Let's end this shutdown. Let's make sure people have affordable health care in this country. Let's make sure our employees get paid. Let's do all of that this weekend. I'm on board for all that. Hopefully we can get it done.
Is there objection to the original request?
Madam President.
Objection is heard. Senator from Wisconsin.
So again, let me correct, I hate to say falsehoods, just presented here in the chamber. My bill is completely silent in terms of presidential authority. The senator from Michigan, I know they wanted to put language in there to restrict presidential authority, but the fact of the matter is, and I made him well aware of this, that's a bill that would never be signed into law. So if you're serious about actually paying the workers, you'll recognize the fact, admit that my bill is completely silent. It does not add, it does not detract from presidential authority. There's nothing in the bill that does that. Secondly, we tried to come accommodations with a number of senators from the other side for a couple weeks. Pretty much fell on deaf ears. So again, I know it is unfortunate that he objected right now, and if we proceed and vote and actually get on the bill, and I hope at least we do that, that will take quite some time. So Sings has already objected. What I am happy to do, not happy, I'm very disappointed I'm going to have to do this, but we'll look at their language. If it's acceptable, and again, if he is doing anything with presidential authority, adding or detracting, that won't be signed into law. It's a fruitless exercise. But if we can accept their language, we'll look at it, and then maybe we can come back down here, do another unanimous consent request, and pass this today. That is what I hope we can do. So we'll look at the language. It's very unfortunate we didn't pass it right now, but maybe later this afternoon we can do so. With that, I yield the floor.
President.
Mr. President, I move to proceed to calendar number 168, H.R. 5371.
Clerk will report.
Motion to proceed to calendar 168, H.R. 5371, an act making continuing appropriations and extensions for fiscal year 2026 and for other purposes.
Mr. President, yesterday we finally heard Democrats entertain the notion of reopening the government. It only took them 38 days. Why in the days before progressives were urging Democrats to prolong the shutdown in perpetuity? One House Democrat said, and I quote, "There would be hell to pay if Senate Democrats don't let events play out," end quote. And so I'm glad to see Democrats, after 38 days, back down from the maximalist and frankly insane position they've held since September. The Democrat leader's proposal is a non-starter for the Republican majority. The Democrat leader wants to believe that this is a, quote, simple proposal, that it is some sort of compromise, but it is not. He's talking about throwing tens of billions more taxpayer dollars at a program that even Democrats admit has failed to lower health care costs. The American people are tired of Washington taking their hard-earned money and spending it on costly government programs that fail to follow through on their promises. Of course, that's what Democrats have been doing for years with Obamacare. They passed Obamacare 15 years ago without a single Republican vote. And in that time, Democrats' signature health care law has failed to do what Democrats promised. If you like your health insurance, you can keep it. Not true. If you like your doctor, you can keep him or her. Not true. Premium costs will go down. Not true. And actually, the opposite is true. They keep going up. Obamacare drove premium prices higher. So in 2021, in the Democrats' American Rescue Plan Act, a bill best known for setting off a years-long inflation crisis, Democrats created these Biden bonuses, further papering over the higher premium costs under Obamacare with bigger taxpayer subsidies. Again, they did that without a single Republican vote. And then in another partisan bill in 2022, they extended the subsidies through the end of this year. Democrats chose the expiration date. They created this cliff. And now they want to blame Republicans for their mess. Give me a break, Mr. President. Republicans are not about to further burden taxpayers by blindly extending a flawed program. The Democrats' proposal is just more of the same, masking rising premiums and padding insurance companies' profits with more taxpayer dollars. The Democrat leader's proposal is a non-starter. There's still only one path out. It's a clean funding extension. The House has already passed a clean funding extension. The President supports one and would sign it into law immediately. We're only a handful of votes away from passing one right here in the Senate, Mr. President, a bill that has been sitting at the desk now for 38 days. We reopen, and then we can start talking about addressing the health care mess that Democrats created. Mr. President, I know that Democrats know this. Just yesterday, the Democrat whip came to the floor to say something that I've been waiting for a Democrat to say for a long time. He said that the first thing we need to do is reopen the government, then address the cost of health care and advance appropriations bills. I've been saying that for about 6 weeks now. And I think that's exactly what we need to do today. And so I hope the Democrat whip and others in his caucus will join the 3 Democrats who have been supporting a clean continuing resolution, the only bill that can actually end the shutdown. Mr. President, I'm glad to see that after 38 days, Democrats are finally warming up to the idea that their shutdown can't go on forever. And I urge my colleagues to support a clean continuing resolution so we can start a real discussion to address their health care mess, get back to the regular appropriations process, and above all, finally provide relief to the American people. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, after 40 long days, I'm hopeful that we can finally bring this shutdown to an end. And I don't need to go over all the reasons why it's imperative that we get the government open as soon as possible. From the truly precarious situation we are in with regard to air travel to the fact that our staffs have been working without pay for a full 40 days now, all of us, Republicans and Democrats who support this bill, know that the time to act is now. And so in just a few minutes, I will call up the vehicle for a clean continuing resolution packaged with 3 bipartisan year-long appropriations bills: agricultural appropriations, military construction, VA appropriations, and legislative branch appropriations. These bills will fund SNAP for the entire fiscal year. They will fund WIC for the entire fiscal year. And they will fund our veterans for the entire fiscal year. After 40 days of uncertainty, I'm profoundly glad to be able to announce that nutrition programs, our veterans, and other critical priorities will have their full-year funding. And my goal is to quickly move to other full-year appropriations bills. As I've said many times, I firmly believe that the way to fund the government is by passing appropriations bills through regular order, a process that gives senators from both parties the fullest chance to make their voices heard. Mr. President, I also want to mention health care. There's been a lot of talk over the last several weeks on both sides of the aisle about the health care crisis in this country. And I'm thankful to be able to say that we have senators, both Democrat and Republican, who are eager to get to work to address that crisis in a bipartisan way. These senators are not interested in political games. They're interested in finding real ways to address health care costs for American families. We also have a president who is willing to sit down and get to work on this issue. And so I'm looking forward to seeing what solutions might be brought forward. Regardless, as I have said for weeks to my Democrat friends, I will schedule a vote on their proposal, and I've committed to having that vote no later than the second week in December. Mr. President, again, I am optimistic that after almost 6 weeks of this shutdown, we'll finally be able to end it. I will call up that bill in a matter of minutes, and I look forward to passing the clean continuing resolution and appropriations bill package in the very near future. Now, Mr. President, I move to proceed to the motion to reconsider the cloture vote on October 16th on the motion to proceed to H.R. 5371.
The question's on the motion. All in favor say
Leader?
Mr. President, Senator quorum call?
No.
Mr. President, I understand that there is a bill at the desk that's due for a second reading.
The clerk will read the title of the bill for the second time.
S 3168, a bill to appropriate funds for pay and allowances of federal employees and so forth and for other purposes.
Mr. President, in order to place the bill on the calendar under the provisions of Rule 14, I would object to further proceeding.
The objection is heard. The bill will be placed on the calendar.
Mr. President, I'm glad to be able to say that 8 Democrats joined Republicans last night to take the first step to reopen the government. And in the very near future, we will be voting on a final package, a clean continuing resolution until January the 30th, and 3 bipartisan full-year appropriations bills. These bills are the military construction, VA, agriculture, and legislative branch appropriations, 3 of the 12 bills that Congress needs to pass on an annual basis. And what that means, Mr. President, is that year-long funding for SNAP, for WIC, for veterans, for essential farm programs, and for a number of other critical priorities will be met. Mr. President, I said that we will be voting on the final package in the very near future, and I'm hoping that will be hours and not days. We're on the 41st day of this shutdown. Nutrition benefits are in jeopardy. Air travel is an extremely precarious situation. Our staffs and many, many other government workers have been working for nearly 6 weeks without pay. I could spend an hour talking about all the problems we've seen, which have snowballed the longer this shutdown has gone on. But all of us, Democrat and Republican, who voted for last night's bill are well aware of the facts. And I'm grateful that the end is in sight. But I would encourage every member of this body, Democrat or Republican, pro-bill or anti-bill, not to stand in the way of our being able to deliver the coming relief quickly. The American people have suffered for long enough. Let's not pointlessly drag this bill out. Let's get it done, get it over to the House so that we can get this government open. Mr. President, as I have emphasized since being elected Majority Leader last November, I remain deeply committed to advancing full-year appropriations bills through regular order. And we've drafted this continuing resolution to extend to January 30th specifically to give us more time to get this bipartisan work done. I look forward to taking up additional appropriations bills on the floor in the near future. Mr. President, after 41 days, I'm grateful to be able to say that we are close to getting the government reopened. And again, I ask all of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, of both parties, to make it possible for us to quickly pass this bill. Mr. President, I yield the floor. I suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, this has been a very long road, quite literally the longest shutdown in history. I am very, very happy to be able to say that we are coming to the end. And before we close today, I want to take the time to say thank you to my staff who have worked around the clock tirelessly now for the past 6 weeks, to the staff of the Appropriations Committee who have played a critical role in getting us to where we are here today, to the cloakroom staff to every Senate staffer on both sides of the aisle who has spent 41 days coming into work without pay, to custodial staff who, again, without pay, have kept this building and the Senate office buildings livable, to all the institutional staff without whom this place would not run, to the Secretary of the Senate and everyone in her office, the Sergeant at Arms and her team, and the architect of the Capitol and his staff, and everyone on the floor right now making this session happen, and to the men and women of the United States Capitol Police who have shown up during the shutdown day in and day out to protect the rest of us. I'm humbled by and grateful for your service. I know that the strain of these weeks has been immense, that you all have families, rent to meet, bills to pay, car and mortgage payments. And I'm grateful for all you have done to keep the Senate running, and for all that you do every day, shutdown or no shutdown, to serve the Senate and to serve our country. And with that, after 6 excruciating weeks, I will stop talking and let all of you get some rest. Mr. President, I yield the floor.